Welcome to Buddhism Seeds, where every story drifts like a gentle breeze, carrying your mind away from the noise of life and back into a quiet, peaceful place within. Maybe today has been a long day for you. Tangled numbers, tense conversations, invisible burdens no one can see. Your mind feels like a machine that never turns off spinning, even as your body is exhausted. You lie down, close your eyes, yet sleep still feels far away. So tonight, let me take you on a different kind of journey. 3 hours of ancient Zen stories flowing like a cool stream through your weary soul. No noise, no rush, no pressure to understand or remember. Just relax, just listen. These stories won't teach you how to have more. They'll remind you how to feel enough with what you already have. Not because we don't deserve great things, but because true peace has never lived outside of us. When the mind becomes still, you begin to see the smallest things, moonlight spilling through the window. The rhythm of your slowing breath are already enough to nourish a life of serenity. And now, if you're ready to set down what's been weighing on your heart, come with me into the first story. In the deep forest at dawn, the air is still and cool, like an upturned bell, broken only by the softest birdsong. There nestled under old bamboo rests, a tiny temple moss on its roof tiles, wood fragrant with age. In this place, untouched by time, something happens every morning. As precise as the mountain's breath, an old monk steps onto the worn porch, sits down, and gently lifts one single object he has always held as a treasure, a cracked old earthen bowl. By any ordinary measure, the bowl looks shabby. Its clay is coarse, its surface veined with thin cracks, like dry riverbeds after rain. Its rim is thin, slightly uneven, bending light into flickers like ripples disturbed by a breeze. It has no decoration, no seal of worth. And yet in the old monk's hands, it seems to glow with its own quiet spirit, the beauty of something that has done its one simple duty faithfully for many years. He pulls a soft cloth from his brown sleeve. His breath is slow and deep. He wipes the bowl as tenderly as combing the hair of a sleeping child. Slow circles, steady strokes, each motion light, as if lifting a cloud. Dust loosens, dissolving into the cool, misted air. At the small cracks, his finger pauses, touching them like greeting old scars. If you stood nearby, you could hear the cloth against clay, faint as a forest's whisper. When the bowl is clean, he sets it upright. On his left palm brings his right hand to prayer, straightens his back, lowers his head, and softly says, "Thank you." Not loud, not emphasized, like letting a raindrop fall into a deep well. The word sinks into silence, rippling outward to the roof tiles, to the bamboo, to the dust motes drifting in the early sun. A simple ritual, quiet, unshakable. The young novices often watched, puzzled. Why polish something so ordinary as if it were a sacred statue? Why spend so long on what looks worthless? One brave novice finally asked. The old monk looked up, eyes warm as dawnlight. Every meal I eat passes through its hands. Every drop of water I drink comes from its heart. Without this bowl, how could I live even a single day? The boy stared. The cracks shimmered in the sunlight like small rivers. But it's broken. Why not get a new one? The monk turned the bowl gently, voice steady. Some things, having endured storms, have learned how to stand still. Old but strong, cracked but still full when needed. What fulfills its purpose is precious. The novices grew quiet, Day by day, they slowed down. They learned that wiping the bowl wasn't about cleaning it. It was about seeing the dust, the hand. The bowl about noticing how thin the line is between having and losing. They began to understand why their teacher whispered thanks each morning. Not because the bowl needed to hear it, but because the one saying thank you needed to remember they were receiving. Years passed. The bowl aged as the monk aged. One crack closed, another opened. One day, it almost slipped from his hand. It wobbled, then stilled on the cloth. The novices gasped, but the old monk just chuckled, like a thin ripple of water. Everything falls someday. What matters is that before it falls, we have known how to hold it. That evening, he set the bowl down a little more slowly than usual. Outside, wind touched the bamboo chimes with a note too short to remember, but long enough to feel. And so the days continued. Every dawn, the same gesture, lift, wipe, thank. Nothing changed. Or maybe that very sameness was what changed things the most. It turned an ordinary day into a day of ceremony, an ordinary object into a vessel for gratitude. To strangers, the bowl was worthless, chipped, old, rough. To the monk, it was a loyal friend, a witness of countless meals, sips of water, moments of life. More than that, it was a small doorway into gratitude, and gratitude that was the true wealth in his heart. We live in an age drowning in things, yet starving for enough. Closets overflow kitchens brim. Our hands hold glowing phones worth months of wages, and still our hearts feel empty. Because our minds are trained to look at what's missing instead of what's already here. We've forgotten how to pause, cradle something in our hands and whisper, "Thank you." The old monk had nothing to show off, no wealth, no fame, no followers. But each time he looked at his bowl, he smiled in peace, not because it was worth more than others, but because his heart was grateful for what he had. And that made him richer than anyone clutching 1,000 things, yet feeling hollow. One traveler once mocked him, "You live so simply. Aren't you unhappy?" The monk said nothing. He just scooped a spoonful of plain porridge from that bowl, blew gently, and offered it. The man tasted it, just rice and salt. But somehow it was sweet. The monk smiled. When you cherish each grain, every spoon is a feast. As the Buddha taught, the one who knows contentment is the richest of all. Happiness is not in the food, it's in the gratitude. Gratitude is what turns enough into abundance. It is what makes a clay bowl or a single breath feel whole. Even modern psychology agrees. Those who practice daily gratitude, simply writing 3 small things they're thankful for before bed, are happier, less depressed, and healthier. Science now confirms what the Buddha said 2,500 years ago. Contentment brings joy. Discontent brings suffering, even in paradise. So if life feels heavy, stop, just for a moment. Lift your eyes from the endless plans, put the phone down, breathe deeply and look around. Find your own clay bowl, that simple, maybe worn thing quietly sustaining your life every day. Maybe your mother's tired hands, your child's smile, your still strong body that keeps getting back up. They may not sparkle like gold, but they are the steady ground holding you. When the heart begins to thank the world, changes color from gray to gentle, from heavy to light, you realize you are already far richer than you thought, because happiness has never come from outside. Not from things bought, not from applause, not from flashing lights. those are just passing winds. What stays is how you look at what you already have with a grateful heart, like the old monk with his clay bowl. He never waited to have more before smiling. He smiled because he already had enough and knew it. The old cracked bowl never made him rich in the world's eyes, but it made him rich in spirit, because he knew happiness doesn't have to be big. It just has to be seen with reverence. And when you see what you have with gratitude, even if it's only a deep breath or a humble meal, every moment becomes complete. And then even holding just a simple clay bowl, your heart will shine as if cradling the most precious treasure in the world. Once upon a time, in a flourishing kingdom, there was a king praised like the noonday sun, dazzling unmatched. His palace was a citadel gilded in gold, its long corridors reflecting sunlight like a silver river running on and on. Each morning, ceremonial trumpets roared. Ranks of officials in formal robes lined up like a wall of people presenting memorials. Each night, the royal kitchens burned without rest. The smells of roasted meat, honeyed wine, cinnamon, ginger star, anise, blended into a heady layer of air. It seemed there could be no room for sorrow there. But the higher the sun, the longer the shadow. At night, the entire palace felt covered by a thin mist that smelled of cold metal. And in his chamber, the king lay with eyes open on his brocade bed. The fur blanket was soft as a cloud, yet his chest was heavy as stone. His eyelids wanted to close, but his thoughts were tangled like a spool of thread on fire. He could hear his heartbeat clearly fluttering, uneven like a soldier on the ramparts peering into the dark, afraid of losing the throne, afraid of rebellion, afraid the borders would erupt, afraid of whispered rumors slipping through the curtains like tiny insects stinging an entire night red. On some nights, he sat by a high window looking down at the torchlit square. Below, common folk circled small fires, sharing rough loaves of bread, eating and laughing. Their laughter struck each other and burst like popping corn. The stars over the bay seemed to bend down to listen. He asked himself a question never recorded in the state annals: I have everything. So why don't I have when they have? That peace that needs no guards, no golden locks. Another night when the north wind poured through the window slit. Making a long whistling sound, he summoned his most trusted attendant. "Don't ask," he said. "Don't record." He opened a chest and took out an old coarse cloth tunic, folded long ago, once worn for a stormy hunt, but now looking like something a marketplace oil seller might wear. He removed his royal robe, an action that seemed simple, but sounded like chains falling. Invisible chains of titles of ceremony of public eyes. He put on the rough tunic, pulled on a cloth cap, and left the throne sitting silent like a sleeping mountain. No guards, no drums or horns. He stepped out a small door quietly, like someone relearning how to walk in the dark. Even the act of walking without an entourage was a craft he had long forgotten. The city breathed long breaths at night. He passed a row of fish stalls. A raw, living stench rushed at him, stinging his eyes, something the palace kitchens had always filtered away. He passed the tanner's lane. The smell of lime raw hides the sweat of workers hammering. He passed a tavern where people had their arms around each other singing hoarsely. No one stepped aside, no one bowed. The man in the rough cap was just another shadow in the noisy flow. For the first time in a long while, his back didn't have to stay straight in the imperial posture. His shoulders didn't have to bear a robe heavier than iron armor. His tongue didn't have to weigh each word. Everything on him suddenly felt a layer lighter, as if he had taken off a suit of mail. For a moment, he felt like a dry leaf just off the branch. No roots, no sap, no duty drifting on the wind. Instead of dropping straight down, the leaf discovered a sky strangely wide. He stopped at a roadside inn where coachmen grabbed a night's sleep. A small room, an old wooden bed, a coarse blanket smelling of old sunshine, a window looking out over a gable roof. No velvet curtains, no gentle music. Only the chirring of crickets like night's needle stitching pieces of silence together. He lay down. The wood creaked like a sigh. And something strange happened. He slept. Soundly. No nightmares. No jolting awake to feel the door bar. Sleep came as easily as a child crawling back to its mother's arms. In the morning, the first sunlight on his face was warm, like someone's hand soothing him. He went to the market. The market waited for no one, least of all a man who had just taken off a crown. Haggling calls, cats meowing, hawkers pitching wheels, grinding on grit, all wove into a thick, living tapestry of sound. He stood in the middle of it unnoticed, with no eyes clinging to him, no forced bows. Strangely, that no one needs to know opened a secret door in his chest. He was allowed to breathe at his own pace. A child playing in the dust brushed past splattering mud on his pant leg. Usually a single speck on his hem would send a crowd scrambling to their knees to fix it. Now dirt clung to the rough cloth, leaving a brown streak like the signature of a new day. He looked at the stain and laughed out loud, a laugh that needed no covering. A street vendor passed. An old woman selling bread handed him a hot loaf, steam fogging the tip of his cap. He bit into it, flour, a little salt, a little fat. A simple yet complete flavor. The roundness didn't come from spices, but from the just enough hunger of a man who had walked. He suddenly remembered for too long his food had stopped being delicious because he was hungry, and was only delicious because it was expensive. He wandered to the water point. A man pulled up a bucket, water flashing into broken silver. The man tipped the bucket for him without caring who he was. Cool water ran down his throat, into his belly, along his spine. Each gulp was an exhale. For the second time in a day, he felt his body was his own, not owned by ceremony, not owned by 1,000 eyes. In that bustle, a strange quiet rose from within a quiet, not from the absence of noise, but from the absence of the burden of having to be someone. No need to maintain regal shoulders, no need to weigh words, no need to carry a nation's expectations on two shoulders. That quiet wasn't empty, but full of simple presence. He stopped by a small tailor's shop. A seam on his rough tunic had come loose. The tailor was a young woman, eyes sharp as a needle hand's quick. She looked up, smiled just a moment, and bent down again. Her stitches ran steady like gentle waves. He sat by the doorway, watching the sun move across the floor, his body and mind moving too slowly, very slowly. When she handed the tunic back, he asked the price. She said a number so small that had he been the man of yesterday, he would hardly have heard it. He paid and added one more coin. She was surprised. He felt awkward, nodded, and left not from the posture of dispensing favors, but from a person's wish to say thank you in a clumsy way. At noon, he sat under a tree on a bed of leaves with some porters. the smells of sweat, sun, and earth rich and real. They talked about daily wages, a sick child, the flood arriving early. Not a word about court calendars or agendas. He listened and saw the invisible threads connecting them, a meal where a small fish was shared, the pull between hardship and laughter. He laughed along his voice, dropping his pitch, settling closer to his chest. Toward evening he walked past the city gate. The wall cast a long shadow, birds dipped to the tiled roofs. Far off sunset painted a red stroke on the hillside. He looked at that red, as if seeing for the first time the color of Let It Go. The wind shifted. The rough tunic clung to his skin. Each coarse fiber reminded him there was another kind of life, not gilded, not submissive, but steady, honest, warmed by small things, a hot piece of bread, a cool gulp of water, a stitch mending a hem, a stranger's laugh. Together they formed a lesson not found in manuals of rule. Power cannot buy sleep. Fame cannot trade for peace. That night he returned to the inn. The room was still old, the bed still creaked, the blanket still coarse. He hung the tunic on a wooden peg and suddenly noticed his palms were peculiarly clean, not of incense or palace perfume, just the smell of sun and dust. He placed a hand on his chest and felt his heartbeat even out. Outside, a fine rain fell like threads. Raindrops tapped the tiles lightly, steady, rhythmic. He closed his eyes and slept again, easily, like drinking water. The next morning, stepping into the street, the early sun touched his face, gentle as a mother smoothing a child's hair. He stood in the market street watching people set out their goods, a child herding chickens, an old woman counting small coins. No one knew he was the king, and that was precisely what freed him from the burden of having to be king every second. He suddenly grasped a truth as simple as a stone. Some crowns are light on the hair, but heavy on the heart. Taking them off is not always to escape, but to remember that the head was born bare and the sky was always high. When he finally turned back toward the palace, he would return because duty cannot be abandoned. He carried something no one could see, a piece of silence taken from the morning market, a sleep borrowed from a wooden bed, a stain on his pant leg that had dried, but left a feeling and a truth that needed no proclamation. Tranquility does not come from power. It comes from wanting less and being present in nameless things. From then on, he kept the rough tunic in his chest, not to display as a keepsake, but as a discreet mirror. Whenever his heart rippled, he opened the chest and touched the fabric. The memory of the road of bread, of rustic laughter returned, sweeping clean the clatter of swords and spears in his mind. And that is how a king relearned the first motion of every human life, to walk as just a person. In that step, sleep found his neck again. Breath returned to his chest. His heart found its rhythm. In that step, the peace he thought locked away, somewhere in the treasury, turned out to be standing right outside the market gate, waiting only to say something very small. Welcome back. Power, status, and fame. The things people spend a lifetime chasing do not automatically bring peace. On the contrary, sometimes they are like invisible chains, quietly tightening around the mind, making each step heavy, even when the road is strewn with flowers. The more you have, the greater the fear of loss. The higher you climb, the nearer the fear of falling. The higher the peak, the more loneliness surrounds you. The king of long ago understood this in the moment he put on the rough tunic. To have peace, it isn't about gaining more power. It's about needing less. So it is with us. Every morning when we step out the door, we put on invisible royal robes, job titles, targets to hit, images to maintain, pressure to outdo others. Gradually, those robes of power, once a source of pride, become burdens, making us forget that the heart needs only simplicity to be happy. We chase crowded schedules until we forget what it feels like to sit quietly on a lazy afternoon doing nothing. We chase compliments until we drop our own natural laughter. We hoard money so that one day we can rest, not realizing that peace isn't in the future. It exists only in the present. Many recent psychological studies also show that when people achieve big goals, promotions, high-value assets online, fame, happiness rises only briefly, then quickly returns to baseline. This is called hedonic adaptation. The more we have, the more the mind gets used to it, and the more it hungers. Meanwhile, those who practice slowing down, reducing wants, spending time on meditation, gratitude, and genuine relationships report higher and more stable life satisfaction. The Buddha taught one who knows enough is joyful, even lying on the ground. One who does not know enough is uneasy, even living in the heavens. A simple teaching, but a compass for a lifetime. Because as long as a mind keeps demanding, even if a whole kingdom is placed in our hands, we will still feel lacking. Only when the mind agrees to pause do we see what we need for peace has already been around us. The king needed just one day to understand. We sometimes need a whole life. When he returned to the palace, the rough tunic was still in his hands, the throne still glittered, courtiers still filled the sky, the music still thundered. But from then on, in his heart, there was a gentle quiet no throne could touch. He did not abandon responsibility. But whenever his heart was unsettled, he only had to look at the rough tunic to remind himself, you don't need to carry the whole world on your shoulders to deserve to live. Maybe none of us are kings, but every day, each of us puts on heavy garments, the pressure to succeed, to be perfect, to become the best version society expects. Remember, happiness isn't about how high you stand, but whether you stand lightly. Sometimes letting go of just one expectation, removing just one heavy garment from your shoulders, makes your heart as light as morning clouds. And who knows, in a small room without a throne or glory, we might finally sleep deeply, the kind of sleep that comes only when the heart is truly at peace. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled against a mountainside, dawn always arrived 1 beat late. Fine mist like silk wrapped across thatched roofs, moss covered the fences in a lush green, and the red dirt road into the forest still held last night's tracks of foraging martens. Each morning, when the sun had only lifted a pale streak of gold above the hilltop, the woodcutter rose. He slung on his worn old basket, took up his axe with a wooden handle chipped near the head. Its blade sharpened on river stones, wasn't razor new, but each strike was still neat and true. The path he took was a foot trail through dense woods, where the scent of sap mixed with damp earth into a fragrance belonging to morning. Dew gathered on every blade of grass. A light brush of cloth bursted into tiny beads, sparkling like leftover stardust. Overhead, forest birds traded verses. Their long notes echoed off the cliffs and came back like replies in an unseen symphony. With every step, he hummed a few bars, No words, no rhyme. Sometimes a made-up tune born in the moment. Sometimes rising and falling notes about the coming rains. The field already sown the roof, just patched in time before a big wind. At a good stand of trees, the woodcutter chose a dry fallen one, measured the trunk, judged the direction it would lie, then raised his axe. Thock, thock, thock. The sound steady, unhurried. Between strokes, he paused to listen to the forest's heartbeat. Under the grain, waited for the trunk to tremble slightly, and only then gave the final blow. The tree went down leaves, whispering against one another like a farewell. He cut it into lengths, stacked them neatly in his basket, and tied them tight with a rattan cord. When his arms tired, he sat in the shade of an ancient tree, turned his face up to the deep blue sky sifted through the canopy. Sunlight fell in mottled squares on the ground. He sipped spring water, wiped his sweat, and sang again, soft and long, almost not there. The forest brightened a notch. Hoofbeats sounded on the path. A party passed by, small feathered flags tied to spearheads, the armor of attendants flashing back the sun. A palanquin quivered lightly, its curtains stirring. A high official was touring the borderlands. Because the horses were tired, the party stopped at a side track. When he heard the song keeping time with the axe blows, surprise loosened the crease of his habitually furrowed brow. Who would sing out here and sing while doing work this hard? The thought flashed just as he jerked the reins and brought his horse to a halt. The official stepped down, lifted his robe out of the dust, and walked toward the voice. Before him stood a man in patched clothes, hands thick with calluses, shirt soaked with sweat. But it was the man's face that made him pause. It was lit like someone at a festival, features at ease, eyes bright with a look of aliveness and peace. Not a forced cheer, not wine-loosened mirth. A joy that came from someplace very quiet inside. "Hey, woodsman," the official called, curiosity salted with a little disbelief. "You toil all day, and your pay can't be much. So why sing so cheerfully?" The woodcutter set down his axe. Sweat ran across his cheek and vanished into the earth as if it had never been. He used the hem of his brown shirt to blot his forehead, then looked up. His gaze neither clung to rank nor turned away. He smiled a smile that cost no effort, like a leaf flipping gently as wind passes. "Because I owe nothing to anyone, and I'll still have dinner tonight." The men behind the official chuckled. Some raised brows, some shrugged. The answer was so short, so simple, it was hard to believe. The official didn't laugh, but a small spark flickered in his eyes, the kind that catches on an old memory. He pressed further as if to make sure he'd heard right. "That's all, yes. That's all." The woodcutter shrugged and smiled again. "Oh, no one, the head is light. Supper waiting tonight, the heart is calm. Then singing is easy." A shift of wind carried resin and sun-scorched grass. The official took in the chipped axe handle, the frayed-edged basket, the hands crisscrossed with healed cuts. The man before him had precious little to cling to, yet he seemed to stand steadier than many the official knew in town, people with jade on their wrists and flowery words on their tongues, who still chewed their worries at night like chewing stones. "You're not afraid tomorrow. It will rain. The firewood will be wet. The fire will die." The official asked more slowly now, as if he'd forgotten he'd come to check ledgers. "If it rains, I sleep early. I'll dry the wood on sunny days." The woodcutter said, eyes on the leaves above. When a day comes, I deal with that day. If I can sing today, I sing. That calm poured into the ear like spring water. Not cold, not hot, just enough to soothe a place unseen in the official's chest. He looked around. The forest was still forest. The sky still sky, hard work, still hard work. The only thing different was how this man stood before his life so simple. There was no room left for the what-ifs that gnaw. The entourage began to fidget. The official waved a hand and told his men to give the woodcutter some rations, a reward for the song. The woodcutter accepted, nodded thanks, and put them in his bag without opening it. He turned back to the waiting trunk and lifted his axe. The chopping sounded steady again, but this time another heartbeat kept pace. Someone's in the party. Whether the officials or the young soldiers standing nearest, no one could say. On the road back to town, the official sat in his palanquin. The thin curtain couldn't keep out the strange thoughts now drifting in. The poles jolted in ruts, but his head wandered. He repeated the words, "Oh, no one," and dinner tonight, and the 4 words, "Oh, no one," bumped a dark corner. Debts of favor, of grudge, of expectations, of public gaze, and a debt to himself, a long sleep. As for dinner tonight, that small thing loomed larger than many memorials he signed. Enough, it turned out, didn't live in numbers, but in the feeling of touching the sure part of a day. As for the woodcutter, when the hoofbeats faded, he only smiled lightly. He gathered all the cut wood and tied it tight. The heavy basket pulled his shoulders down, but his gait stayed unhurried and sure. Before leaving the forest, he stood at the stream's edge, scooped water to wash his face, and watched his reflection ripple outward in rings. Across the bank, a butterfly perched on a purple flower and lifted off. He cocked his ear and listened to the forest. The wind returned a tune, a song that needed no words. By the time he reached the village, the sun was tilting. Children ran to the tapping on a tree trunk, announcing the firewood's return. Smoke rose from kitchen eaves, evening smoke curling like gray silk around the mountainside. The woodcutter delivered bundles to households that had asked the day before, took a few small coins, and accepted a hot bowl of soup someone pressed into his hand warm up first. He sat under the leaf-thatched eave and ate soup with white rice, local rice, nutty and tender. The first bite fell warm through his belly, his eyes half closed with the taste. He remembered the morning's question and smiled again. Night shifted. The stars dug deeper into the violet sky. Insects buzzed steadily, like a clock with no hands. The woodcutter lay on his bamboo bed, hands behind his head, listening to the cat's soft steps. Outside, the dirt road was quiet, the drag marks of his basket still fresh. He listed tomorrow's tasks in his mind, then let them go like dropping a leaf into a stream. Maybe it would rain, maybe not. Either way, he would rise early, shoulder his basket, feel the cool axe handle in his palm, and sing on the way into the woods. His life was pieced together from small squares. Like that, small squares enough to keep the heart at ease. The story seems so ordinary it could slip away, yet it has a soft thorn at its center. Why could someone with almost nothing sing so easily? His answer was short, but long enough to snag in a nobleman's memory. Oh, no one, the head is light. Dinner tonight, the heart is calm. That leaves room for a song. And perhaps with just that space, a person can pass through the deep forest of a day without feeling lost. That answer left the official standing still, as if he'd heard a language from another world. In an age where people scrambled to hoard gold and silver, fought for power, and climbed each rung of fame like scaling a sheer cliff, there was a man who considered owing no one and having dinner tonight enough to be happy. That simplicity was like a cold gust cutting through the heavy brocade on the official's shoulders, making him fall quiet without meaning to. Perhaps we have grown too used to equating joy with grandeur. Perhaps we've been taught that only after spectacular success, a vast sum of money, or standing on a stage to thunderous applause, are we allowed to feel happy, allowed to smile at ourselves. But the woodcutter in a windless forest proved the opposite. Joy doesn't have to be big. Joy only has to be true. A hot meal after a long, tiring day. An afternoon when no one interrupts and no one demands. A deep night's sleep, untroubled by debts, unafraid of being pushed out of your place come morning. Just that is enough to make the heart light like a leaf slipping from a branch. No straining, no forcing. The official returned to his mansion, but that line kept murmuring in his head like a stream threading through stones. Owe no one and dinner tonight. He had dozens of servants, yet lay awake nightly fearing betrayal. He had a treasury filled with gold, yet every meal tasted flat because his mind was uneasy. He had resounding reputation, yet each time he stepped into a splendid room, he felt a stretch of emptiness long as the wind inside him. And then, by candlelight, throwing his shadow on the wall, he realized the woodcutter was poor in possessions, but rich in freedom. He himself was rich in possessions, but imprisoned in unending worry. The Buddha taught, no possession is more precious than a mind unentangled. We do not suffer because we lack much, but because we keep wanting more. We are not tired from real burdens, but from looking at someone else's load and comparing it to our own. The woodcutter didn't look at the official's life with envy, so his heart still had room to sing. But we just hearing that someone is more successful, richer, more famous, suddenly feel our own day shrink and turn meaningless. In truth, today still has sunlight. There is still rice. There are still people who love us quietly, waiting for us to come home. It's just that our eyes have been clouded by the smoke of rivalry, so we no longer see. Many people spend their whole lives running until they have the house, the car, the status, the name, only to startle awake and find their joy got lost long ago. Somewhere at the forest's edge in the carefree song of a poor woodcutter. No one says you must abandon your dreams. Dreams are what make us rise early, keep tired hands working, keep our eyes bright after many stumbles. But remember, this don't trade all of today's joy for a hazy someday, because no one knows for sure whether tomorrow will come. And if it doesn't, will we regret discovering we were never truly happy tonight, not even with a hot meal, a peaceful sleep, and a mind not tangled in debts? Peace isn't measured by the money in your pocket, but by how many worries you've untied from your heart. Some have millions in hand, yet can't eat well or sleep well for fear of losing it. Others own nothing grand, yet smile every morning simply because the sky is blue and their hearts are light. Research in positive psychology has also shown once basic needs are met, more income does not meaningfully increase long-term happiness. Reducing anxiety and comparison steadies the mind more. And sometimes to loosen one knot of worry, what's needed isn't earning more, but learning not to compare. Because no one lives another's life. No one must resemble anyone else to deserve joy. Each road has its own pace. Each life has its own season to bloom. Measuring ourselves by others only shrinks the heart like a tree yanked from its soil to chase the shadow of the tree next to it. The woodcutter in that small forest didn't need to become a grand official to sing. He sang because he felt he had enough for today. Enough doesn't mean nothing left to dream, but knowing how to pause to savor what is and then take the next step. Perhaps what we need most isn't more wealth, but fewer demands, so we can notice the small things that feed us each day, a hot meal after work, late afternoon sunlight glinting on the eaves, or just a deep sleep untroubled by anxious thoughts. Like the woodcutter's song rising lightly in the deep forest, needing no audience, needing no applause, needing only a heart peaceful enough to hum. And who knows, when we begin to be grateful for each small thing, we'll sing too, whether we're chopping wood in a forest or standing in a noisy city. Not so others can hear, but so we ourselves remember. Joy doesn't lie in having more, joy lies in knowing enough and in living this day fully. Once upon a time, in a small mountainside temple where white clouds played year-round among the crowns of ancient pines, there lived an old monk in a life of simplicity and stillness. The temple wasn't large, just a few old wooden rooms, moss-covered roof tiles, a stone courtyard mottled by time. Each morning before sunlight could slip through the trees, and while dew still beaded on the lotus leaves in the little front pond, the old monk awoke. He stepped from his room, a slender figure in a worn brown robe, gentle eyes reflecting a soft glow like the last of the moon. His day began with a task most would call small, yet he performed it with full solemnity, carrying water from the stream at the foot of the hill up to the temple. Across a bamboo yoke, he tied 2 clay jars. One jar was intact, smooth gleaming, catching a warm brown sheen in the early sun. The other was quite different, its body dull, blotched by time, and marked by a crack running from the lip down to the base like a sleeping scar that had never disappeared. Each day he walked the winding stony dirt path, the swish of his cloth sandals joining the voices of forest birds just waking. At the bank he washed both jars clean, filled them to the brim, then lifted the yoke to his thin shoulders and climbed back uphill. And each day, water from the cracked jar quietly leaked, drop by drop, glittering in the morning light, soaking into the earth like beads of time, like streams of thought no one could hear. While the sound jar kept its water whole, the cracked one slowly lost itself, bit by bit, the entire way home. No one at the temple questioned it. To them, it was simply the monk's habit, like the morning bell, like the evening incense. Until one morning, a novice had just been sent to the temple to study. He was about 10 eyes black and bright like glass beads, curious about everything. That day, he was assigned to follow the old monk down to the stream for water. He walked quietly behind, fingering his robe's hem, watching closely. When he saw water trailing from the cracked jar along the path, he frowned. With each step, he tracked the drops, darkening the dust, leaving a wet ribbon down the trail. Halfway up the slope, he couldn't hold back and blurted, "Master, why don't you throw that jar away? It's cracked and loses so much water every day. If you used 2 sound jars, you could carry twice as much." The old monk didn't answer at once. He stopped, set the yoke down by the roadside, and exhaled softly as if hearing a question not new yet worthy of reply. He turned to the boy, eyes kind as late spring sun. "Try looking back along the road we just walked." The novice, a little confused, turned around, and his heart seemed to skip. The familiar dirt path split into 2 very different halves. On the right, where the sound jar rode the yoke, the ground was dry and gray, littered with stones bare as if life had never touched it. On the left, where the cracked jar rode, ran a band of wildflowers, slender yellow daisies swaying in the breeze, tiny purple blossoms tucked between rocks, and a few white angelica stalks rising like small candles shimmering in the early light. Those seemingly useless droplets had been quietly watering that strip of earth for months and years. No one had noticed, not even the novice, until this moment. He stood still, eyes wide, unblinking. The old monk bent, lifted the yoke to his shoulder again, and as he walked past, he smiled, his voice slow as a bell heard from afar. "The water leaking from that cracked jar has awakened the sleeping seeds in the soil. Because of it, flowers grow and brighten the road we travel each day." The boy said nothing. He only watched the thin figure fade up the slope, flowers on one side and barren ground on the other. A strange feeling rising in him, both tender and a little sharp. From that day on, whenever he followed the master to the stream, the novice no longer looked at the cracked jar with pity. With every drop that fell, he followed it, with his eyes imagining it awakening some tiny hidden seed beneath the earth. And when new blossoms began to open, he felt them blooming inside him too. The cracked jar still leaked, still felt rough, still could not hold full like the sound jar beside it. But to the old monk it was not useless, because some kinds of worth aren't in keeping, but in quietly giving. And some flaws placed in the right spot, used in the right way, become what beautifies the world, like the cracked jar, like each of us, none of us perfect, yet still able to offer a gentle share to life if we learn to turn our cracks into drops that nourish what's around us. Not every imperfection is useless. Some fractures we think are faults become the very channels through which life spreads. That cracked jar may never hold water to the brim, but the drops that escape quietly water the tiny seeds buried deep, and then a whole path bursts into bloom. The old monk did not scold it for being incomplete. He chose to see its particular value. And what about us? Do we sometimes see ourselves as a cracked jar in this world? We stare at what's not perfect, our mistakes, our failures, our limits, and sigh, believing they make us unworthy of happiness. But is that true? Or is it just a story the mind has repeated so many times that we mistake it for absolute truth? Modern society pushes standards into our heads. Never be wrong, be better than others, be flawless. The more we chase perfection, the more we lose the ability to love ourselves while we're still unfinished. Psychology calls this the spotlight effect. We magnify our small mistakes while others barely notice them. We fixate on the crack and forget that sometimes it's through the crack that light can enter. Like the novice on his first trip to the stream, focused only on the water, lost blind to the bright band of flowers rising along the way. Perhaps the cracks in each of us are quietly watering something beautiful nearby, even if we haven't noticed yet. Perhaps our awkwardness lets others feel relief from the pressure to be perfect. Perhaps our past pain teaches us how to listen to a hurting soul. Perhaps the weakness once criticized teaches us to be gentle with the weakness of others. And perhaps the drops we think we're losing are quietly greening a heart that was withering. The Buddha taught, no one is born complete. Only when we clearly see and accept what is incomplete do we begin the path of liberation. Acceptance does not mean giving up, but stopping the punishment of ourselves for what cannot be changed and using those very things to nourish something better. Happiness has never required perfection. It only asks for a heart tender toward its own broken pieces, wise enough to set them in the right place so they are no longer a burden, but become drops of water quietly making flowers bloom along someone else's way. The monk still carried water each day. The sound jar still reached the temple brimming full. The cracked jar still shed drops along the road, and those drops still watered the little flowers, keeping them in bloom all the way home. No one applauded the cracked jar. No one praised its merit during chanting. But if one day it were gone, that whole path would turn bare, dry, and quiet, as if it had never held the colors of life. The same is true of each of us. Maybe no one sees the silent loads bending our shoulders. Maybe no one sees how many times we've stood back up after nearly breaking. Maybe no one claps for the quiet efforts we sow day after day. Yet because of those small unseen things, someone's day becomes lighter. A smile appears. A tiny hope is rekindled when they thought nothing was left to hold. That is value, even unseen, still blooming quietly around each step. So don't fear your cracks. They do not make you less worthy. They make you more human, more gentle, and closer to other hearts that are also mending. Like that monk, when we learn to see beauty in the small, we stop forcing ourselves to be perfect before we deserve love. We learn to love the crooked, the cracked, because we understand it is precisely from those places that flowers grow. Once upon a time, in the courtyard of an ancient temple tucked deep in quiet hills, there lived an old monk who was exceedingly simple. That temple felt like its own world, cut off from all noise. In the mornings, the temple bell rang long like a thread of smoke, dissolving into the mist still clinging to the crowns of ancient Bodhi trees. At noon, sunlight poured down like honey onto the moss-flecked brick courtyard, slowing even the fall of a single dry leaf. Every such noon, after the community finished their meal, when the novices bustled out of the refectory and the chatter faded along the wooden corridors, the dining court sank back into a near sacred silence. Only one person remained, the old monk. He did not rise in a hurry like the others. He sat still for a while, as if listening to the breath of time. Only when the whole space had gone utterly quiet did he slowly stand and step down onto the bricks, his thin fingers that had copied scriptures by the tens of thousands of characters that had rolled prayer beads for more than half a lifetime, now slowly bent to pick up each little grain of rice scattered on the floor. Grains stuck with brick dust, grains wedged in the seams between stones, grains lying right by the threshold, all of them. He patiently picked up, set neatly into his palm, then dropped back into the empty bowl. His fingers trembled slightly with age, yet each movement was uncannily precise, like a silent ritual. Noon light slanted down, casting his shadow long across the tiles, a quivering shadow yet steady as an old pine before a storm. No one understood why he did this. To the young novices, they were just a few spilled grains of rice, things everyone considered meaningless, not worth a thought. At first, many only glanced and walked away. A few whispered to each other, "Maybe the master is stingy, or maybe he's used to this from hard times," until one day. That day was more stifling than usual. Lunch had just ended, and several novices happily rushed into the yard, taking turns pouring water over their heads at the well to cool off. Only the old monk sat quietly as always. A novice who hadn't been at the temple, long, thin frame eyes black and bright like longan seeds, suddenly stopped. He stood hidden behind a pillar, secretly watching every movement. When he saw the monk stoop to pick a grain pressed tight into a crack in the bricks, he couldn't hold back his curiosity and stepped closer. "Master, there are only a few spilled grains of rice. Why do you pick up every single one like that?" The old monk paused. He looked up. In eyes clouded by age, there suddenly shone a gentleness like early mountain mist. He smiled, and the smile seemed to light his wrinkled face, because in every grain of rice is the labor of countless people. The boy blinked, confused. The monk went on softly, voice unhurried, like telling an ancient story. Someone plowed under harsh sun so the seed could sprout. Someone harvested in the rain, shoulders soaked so the sheaves wouldn't fall into the mud. Someone pounded the rice until their hands were calloused, then washed it, then cooked it. For each grain to reach our hands, it has passed through many hands, much sweat, and many times of storm and wind. We eat it in a moment, but they have spent whole seasons. So even a small grain should not be wasted. A light breeze crossed the courtyard, lifting a few dry leaves. The novice stood still, eyes wide, speechless. His small hand unconsciously gripped the hem of his brown robe, as if he had just understood something he'd never considered before. From that day on, he no longer dashed into the yard after meals. He stayed behind quietly, following the old monk, picking up the spilled rice. At first, his hands were clumsy, and grains fell again, but the monk did not scold him. He only smiled and set a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Just pick them up with all your respect, and your hands will grow deft." Indeed, little by little, the small fingers learned patience. The boy began to see the grains as no longer meaningless. They were like drops of sunlight, compressed, like silent drops of sweat fallen somewhere far away, now become life in the bowl before him. Many years later, after the old monk had passed, people still spoke of the image of him bending to pick up each grain in the noon-bright courtyard. No one clearly remembered his name. No statue was carved of him for worship. But the novices of those days, now virtuous monks, still kept the habit of bending to pick up each spilled grain of rice, because they understood. In every grain of rice is the labor of countless people. And because they had once seen an old monk with trembling hands and eyes gentle as morning mist teach them that not with admonitions, but by the way he bent down, gently, patiently, gratefully. A grain of rice is so small we easily dismiss it, yet to have it is the long chain of bent backs and calloused hands, quietly working the fields. It is the farmer stooped over, planting each seedling, standing in cold water in early spring when the fields are still blanketed with mist. It is the reaper beneath burning midday sun sweat streaming into golden waves of grain. It is the one shouldering heavy sacks to the drying yard, then sitting for hours to sift out empty husks and stray straw. It is the one pounding milling, lighting the stove, stacking the firewood, tending the pot of soft, fragrant rice set on the table. Just a single grain, but inside it are the sweat of sky and earth, and the strength and time of many people. Each grain is not just food, it is care, sacrifice, an entire world quietly joining to keep us alive each day. Yet we have grown used to an age of excess, used to letting rice go cold and dry, and then throwing it away, used to picking and choosing only the tastiest dishes used to waste as if everything existed only to serve us. We forget when we toss a grain of rice, we are tossing away the sweat of a stranger who bent under the sun for it. The old monk did not bend to pick up each grain out of miserliness, but because his humble heart would not allow him to belittle the labor of the many. Each time he lifted a grain, he was not only reclaiming food, he was picking up gratitude that had been slipping from human hearts. Why is it that the more we have, the less grateful we become? Because the more abundant our lives, the easier it is to forget that the small things around us are not a given. We eat as if it were a matter of course, drink a cup of clean water, as if it were an unquestioned right, flip a switch, and watch the light come on, as if it were obvious. But out there, millions still do not know what they will eat today. And there are lands where children must walk miles for a scoop of muddy water. It is precisely by forgetting gratitude that we feel lacking even while living amid plenty. Modern psychology has also shown that regularly practicing gratitude reduces stress and anxiety and increases life satisfaction. This is what the Buddha reminded us of as well. One who is grateful is one who is blessed. For gratitude not only keeps us humble, it helps us see the richness already present right now in even the smallest things. A person grateful for each grain of rice will no longer complain about a simple meal. A person grateful for each leaf will no longer grumble when autumn comes early. A person grateful for each breath will no longer worry about a tomorrow that hasn't arrived. That monk lived plainly, no possessions, no fame, yet every meal to him was a festival. Because in each small grain, he saw the whole universe joining to nourish him. And that alone turned the simplest life into a miracle. We don't need more to feel enough. What's needed isn't the quantity of things, but the ability to pause quietly, look deeply into what is here, and be grateful that it remains with us. When gratitude sprouts, we no longer want to seize more, to fill a void, no longer measure and compete to prove our worth, no longer fear loss, because we understand all is impermanent, and the most precious thing is the moment we are living. Then we gently cherish the small things that keep us alive. A simple meal, a full night's sleep, an embrace from someone we love, a deep breath. Without worry, true happiness has never been in grand things, but in how we treat the small things each day. For if we don't value the small, we will always feel lacking. Even with a mountain of gold, we will not feel enough. Bending to pick up a grain of rice won't make us richer, but it enriches the heart with humility. and that humble heart is the most fertile soil for happiness to take root. Only when we can bow our heads do we clearly see the beauty quietly sustaining us. Each day, the things that seem small, yet are the foundation of a life that is sufficient, steady, and at peace. Once upon a time, on an empty plot of land at the edge of a village, there was a boy who often came to play alone on windy afternoons. That place was a field of wild grass, stretching all the way to the bamboo groves at the horizon. Each time the wind blew down from the hills, the dry golden grass bent like a small wave, rustling like the earth and sky whispering. No one chose this place to play, because there was nothing there except the wind. But to the boy, it was paradise. That afternoon, as the last light of day began to slant, he brought along a simple paper kite, something he had made himself from a few thin bamboo slats and a scrap of old cloth he'd asked from his mother. The bamboo was slightly warped, the hemp string frayed, but he hugged it to his chest, as if it were a treasure. He stood in the middle of the wide-open field, his small, bare feet on the cracked earth hands gripping the string-tight eyes, lifted to the deep, clear blue sky. A gust of wind swept by. He rose on his toes and let go. The kite shot upward, trembling, and then filling full with wind, banking across the sky like a small bird finding its sky again after a season of shelter. The evening breeze carried the scent of dry weeds and a hint of the earth's tang. The golden light shining from behind made the kite look lit from within, casting its shadow, and the boys into two long streaks on the ground, like a still painting, yet full of life. He ran a few steps, then stopped, then ran again. Each time the kite surged higher, he burst out laughing, his voice clear as a small bell. Each time it tilted and wobbled, he tugged lightly on the string, cheering out loud, as if encouraging a little friend bravely flying up into the sky. In that moment, the whole world seemed to be just the boy, the kite, and the wind. No winners, no losers, only sun and wind, and a pure, bright joy in his eyes. A few adults passed by. They were farmers bringing rice home, shoulders dusted with straw. They stopped, leaned on their hoe handles, and watched the boy running circles around the field with his worn, ragged kite. They looked at each other and smiled, and one spoke up. "You play like this all afternoon. In the end, what do you get?" The boy paused, standing in the wind-swept field. Sweat ran down his cheeks. His small shoulders heaved with panting breaths, but his smile still shone as bright as the late sun pouring onto the earth. He answered gently without a trace of hesitation, "I get the wind, the sun, and I get to be happy." That simple answer made the adults fall silent. They said nothing more, just stood watching the kite continue to climb, drawing glittering arcs across the sky, turning amber. In their eyes flickered something strange, a hint of regret, a hint of surprise, like hearing an old song again, whose words they had long forgotten, because it had been so long since they had played just to be happy. Everything they did now had to get something: money, achievements, praise, recognition. But that boy, he played just to smile. No goal, no reward. His joy was as light as the wind-filled kite, and precisely because it was light, it flew so high. When the sun dipped behind the bamboo groves and the light turned honey-colored, the boy was still there, hand holding the kite string eyes, shining with quiet happiness. And in the sky, the kite kept circling as if writing something very old. but very true that joy doesn't have to be big. Joy only has to be real. Sounds too simple, doesn't it? But it's exactly that simple thing that adults often lose along the way of growing up. We've gotten used to living as if running a race we must have goals, measure results, prove our worth with some kind of victory. Every step is bound by numbers, timelines, judging eyes. And then we forget joy doesn't need to be useful to be worth living. That boy didn't play to beat anyone. He didn't play for a prize. He didn't play to post it on social media. He played simply because he wanted to play, because the present moment was enough to make his heart thrum. And precisely when he wasn't trying to find joy, he touched the truest joy, the joy of being alive, the joy of wind through his hair and sunlight falling softly on his skin. Meanwhile, many adults work 12 hours a day, fill their schedules, amass assets, achievements, fame. Yet, each night lying alone, they can't remember the last time they laughed for no reason. Because we've gotten used to tying joy to success. We've gotten used to thinking that to be happy, we must achieve something big. But in truth, joy isn't at the finish line. Joy lives in each step we're taking. Joy isn't a reward, it's how we're present in each small moment. That boy wasn't thinking about tomorrow. He didn't compare whether his kite flew higher than anyone else's. He just followed its every movement, each circle in the evening sky, and smiled when the wind shifted. He lived fully in this moment, a place we adults have long abandoned. Studies in psychology have also shown the ability to savor the present is directly linked to long-term happiness. When the mind stops running to the past or worrying about the future, the brain releases more serotonin and endorphins, chemicals that create a sense of peace and contentment. It's what the Buddha called right mindfulness, returning to the present moment, simply knowing you are living, breathing present. And that alone is enough for the heart to feel happiness. Have you ever wished you could live an afternoon like that again, with no worries, no pressure, no need for a reason to smile? Because sometimes what we need isn't another achievement, but to learn how to pause and let a kite fly in the sky of the childhood we've lost for so long. We grow up being taught to plan, to set goals, to always move forward, so we won't be left behind. We learn to seize every minute, exploit every opportunity, and often push ourselves into such a grind that we don't dare stop, because we're afraid that if we stop, we'll fall behind. Afraid that if we're not always busy, not constantly achieving, we won't be worthy. But have we ever asked, where are we running to? And in exchange for what happiness isn't measured by how many goals we conquer, but by how many moments we truly live fully. Great successes may win others' admiration, but it's the small, light moments that bring peace to the heart, because joy doesn't demand to be useful. It only needs us to pause long enough to notice it's already there. The boy with the kite didn't create wealth, didn't bring fame, didn't etch his name onto any leaderboard, but he created a sunlit afternoon and a soul that knows how to smile simply because it's alive. While so many adults who finish countless tasks each day still can't remember by nightfall the last time they felt truly light. It's that simple, and simple is enough. Maybe what's needed now isn't one more success, but a small patch of sky to breathe an unhurried afternoon, a moment to set down the pressure to outdo others. A kite in the heart to remind us joy has never disappeared. We've just been moving too fast to see it. Because happiness isn't in crossing the line first, but in the ability to stop at the right moment to look up at a kite in flight and smile sincerely beneath the wide sky of our very own. Once upon a time, on a late autumn afternoon, the clouds seemed a shade thinner and the sky poured a warm, honeyed light into the temple courtyard. The bluestone paving was mottled with moss, the small cracks like ancient script hidden beneath time. A light breath of wind moved through the Bodhi trees, carrying the whisper of leaves brushing one another like a rhymeless sutra. Leaves had begun to fall here and there, yellow, red, brown, each turning slowly, drawing a half arc before lightly touching the ground. The sound was so faint that unless you stood still to listen, you might think it was the footsteps of time walking on its fingertips. From the old wooden threshold, an elderly Zen master stepped out. His brown robe was as dark as tree shade its hem, brushing the eaves with a soft sound. He carried no beads, no scriptures, only slow steps, even breaths, and a kindness in his gaze gentle enough to soften the sunlight on the courtyard stones. A leaf had just parted from its branch, spun 3 small circles, and landed right before the steps, thin as a damselfly's wing, dry as an old letter. The master stopped. He bowed down with his whole body, as if greeting an honored guest from far away. His thin hand picked up the leaf, set it into the other palm, cupping it into a tiny cradle. He stood still. No words, no action. Only a long, quiet smile. That smile was neither wide nor showy. It drifted slowly like sunset on a lake. The deep lines at the corners of his mouth and eyes turned into warm strokes. In the slanting light, the dry leaf paper thin was dense with fine veins, like a network of secret roads. Each vein told of sap's journey, each joint a change of season. A novice passed along the veranda. He was young, quick-footed eyes, black and bright. Seeing his teacher motionless with a leaf in hand, he stopped in surprise. The wind lifted his robe's hem and tousled the baby hairs on his forehead. He looked at the dry leaf, wrinkled, brittle, about to crumble, then at his teacher's smile, and a guileless question rose in him. "Master, it's only a dry leaf. Why are you smiling like that?" The master did not answer right away. He turned his palm toward the sun. Light sifted through each vein, casting a faint halo on his cheek like mist. In that light, his aged face showed the marks of time, yet his eyes were clear as water just settled. He spoke softly, voice warm as banked embers, "Because this leaf is so beautiful." The novice was puzzled. Beautiful, where the leaf was curled and brown its edges, like a half-burned page. No longer green, no longer glossy, no scent of young sap. As if reading the cloud of doubt in the boy's eyes, the master brought the leaf closer and pointed out what eyes usually skip past. "Look at these veins. When it was green, the sap traveled here and fed the whole canopy. Each line is a path, each node a fork. Summer winds, autumn rains, spring morning light, they all stood here once. Now that it's dry, these routes are revealed like a map of a journey, beautiful like a life told in silence." The novice fell quiet. The master tilted the leaf again so sunlight wove a lacy hollow in its center where the mesh of veins formed a tiny window. See, when green, the leaf gave shade. When it falls, it returns its body to the earth to feed the roots. It's always giving. That is where the beauty is. The wind shifted gently. More leaves fell. One settled on a stone step, one caught on the master's robe, one perched on the shoulder of a stone lion in the corner of the yard. The distant bell rang as a smooth circle of sound, wiping away another thin layer of noise. The master kept looking at the leaf, his words falling light as leaves. People often love only when things are green, when leaves are sleek. Flowers bloom when we are young, when things succeed. But life isn't only one season. When a leaf dries, its veins appear. When life is quiet, what's precious grows clear. The novice looked up at the sky. Between branches already thinning, a small cloud drifted by like a little boat. He asked softly, as if afraid to weigh down the wind, "So, do you smile because the leaf is beautiful, or because of what's behind it?" The master turned to him, eyes warm as a hearth. "Both. Beauty in front and beauty behind. Beauty of form and beauty of meaning. How much you see in a falling leaf depends on how light your heart is." He closed his hand, holding the leaf as if keeping a secret. Then he spoke very slowly. "When I was young, I too walked past dry leaves and saw nothing, only thought the season has passed. Then one day I stood longer before a leaf. I realized I had never truly seen. From then on, each season I practiced looking a little more closely. Closely enough that you can hear a leaf say, 'I have lived.' Now, I return to the earth." Listening, the novice's heart softened like damp soil. Nearby, a tuft of young moss clung to a stone base green, like the first letter of the next season. He bent down and picked up another leaf golden thin as a breath. He set it in his palm and tried turning it to the light. The sunlight passed through. It felt like holding a piece of sky. "I see. It's beautiful too," he said, surprised at himself. The master smiled, eyes crinkling. "That's enough for this afternoon." He took another step and pointed toward the wall where leaves lay like a thin silk ribbon. "You know, a fallen leaf is not the end. It's another way of staying. It becomes earth feeds the roots, and next season grows greener. People are like that. Whenever you let go of what no longer nourishes you, you're making room for something new to grow." The wind strengthened, carrying the smell of distant cooking fires. A few children laughed outside the gate. The novice held the leaf to his chest, like a newly hatched bird. Another question rose in his mind. "Master, if one day I'm old like this leaf, will I be worthy of a smile?" The master laid a hand on his head, oddly warm. "If you have lived fully, given freely, and been grateful, then you are always worthy of a smile, whether green or yellow or brown. Beauty isn't in the color, it's in how you've gone through your season." He opened his hand. The leaf lay still. Then he blew very gently. The leaf rode the breath and drifted onto another step near a clump of wild chrysanthemums. The master watched and nodded. See set in the right place, a leaf makes another corner of the yard more beautiful. Mist was starting to rise from the end of the garden, pulling a thin veil over the grass. On the roof, a small flock of birds shifted perches, lining up before flight. 3 short taps of the wooden fish sounded from the refectory, calling people to a simple meal. The master stood straight, his back upright like a bamboo stalk. He turned toward the veranda and walked in slowly each step, like a round dot on the courtyard, already steeped in evening light. The novice followed, still cradling the leaf as if holding a freshly received answer. Before stepping inside, he looked back once more, leaves scattered like letters fallen from a sky sutra. the old stone steps like a page darkened by fingerprints, the last streak of sun like a line of gold ink. Everything stood still, yet seemed to speak. Night fell, and the wind grew quieter. A thin crescent moon hung on the roofline like a smiling sickle. In the stillness, the novice set the leaf on the table beside a cup of cooled tea. He discovered that by looking just a little longer and listening a little more, everything around him, even the smallest things, turned out to shimmer. And the master's long smile was in the end a greeting to a beauty that asked nothing but to be seen. Tomorrow morning, a few more leaves would fall. The season would lean another degree. Someone passing by might not hear time stepping on its fingertips. But in this corner of the yard, two people, one old, one young, had learned to stand still long enough to listen. And just that was enough to keep a season inside a smile. We usually only pause before the splendid. A bright gem, a vivid blossom, a resounding victory, things that draw other people's eyes. Our minds have been trained to chase what stands out, to tie meaning to what is grand, to believe value must come with applause. So it's rare that we stop for a nameless dry leaf and quietly see the beauty of a life lived to its end. That leaf was once lush green in spring, once stretched to shade those under the tree in summer, once turned brilliant gold in the first autumn winds. And now, having completed its journey, it fell light as a satisfied sigh. No noise, no regret, no need for witnesses. And in that moment, the master stopped bent to lift it, looked with gentle eyes and smiled. He did not smile because of its outward look. He smiled because he saw in it a complete journey through tender green, burning sun, seasonal winds, and back to Mother Earth in peace. As for us, living too fast, we tend to notice only what is big, prominent, worth showing. We forget that true beauty often lies in what is very small, very quiet, very ordinary. A leaf, a bead of dew, a deep morning breath, a grateful glance, a simple meal. Things that seem trivial are the threads silently weaving life each day. But to see them, we must relearn something that seems simple: stillness. Stillness isn't sitting rigidly or fleeing the world. Stillness is stopping the running so we can look deeply at what is here. It's setting the phone down for a few minutes to notice sunlight slanting through a window. It's slowing the breath in the middle of a meeting to remember we are still alive. When the mind ripples like winded water, we notice only what is loud, large, striking. But when the mind settles like a clear lake, the smallest things show their true shape, and those are often the most precious. In the Buddha's teaching, there is a line, "When the mind is still, wisdom arises." Only when the mind is quiet as water can insight and gratitude unfold. The master saw the beauty of a seemingly meaningless leaf, not because he went searching, but because his mind was quiet enough for the leaf's own beauty to appear. Many live amid glittering cities, surrounded by dazzling lights, yet their eyes are empty. They look for happiness in big things and are disappointed when they don't find it, while happiness sits right by their feet like a dry leaf waiting for someone to bend down and pick it up. The irony is, the faster we run to seek it, the farther we get from happiness. Only when we stop and look at small things with a child's wonder do we realize we have never lacked anything to be happy. We simply forgot to look. We forgot to live slowly enough to notice a leaf smiling at us. Why is it that the more people have, the less they feel enough? It sounds paradoxical, but it's simple. because the more we grab for the more space we lose inside to feel. When the mind leans toward what it does not have, the eyes grow dim to what is already here. That's why a tiny leaf could make the master smile for so long, while crowds in a splendid city can't manage a smile. The leaf does not make money bring status or add one more achievement to brag about. But it made him stop just to look, to feel, to be fully present in that moment. The master did not demand the leaf do anything to be worthy. He didn't need it to prove value with brilliant color or heavy fragrance. He simply accepted its beauty as it was, and that is the secret of a heart that feels complete. We don't need more. We need to stop and look deeply. These days, people easily get trapped in the illusion that having more makes life more worthwhile. But research in positive psychology has shown gratitude strongly raises life satisfaction even when circumstances don't change. Which means without adding anything new, simply changing how we look can make life more beautiful. The leaf in the master's hand was finally set gently back on the ground. It lay quietly at ease, as if it knew it had been seen, appreciated, and cherished, not for material worth, but for its pure presence. The master turned toward the main hall. His steps were slow, light as wind skimming water. His face kept that silent smile like late-day sun, the smile of someone no longer driven by imagined lack, living fully with what is. Perhaps there are still big goals waiting out there, but don't let them overshadow the beauty of the small things around you, because when you can smile at a nameless leaf, a drop of dew on a window, a deep morning breath, that is when you no longer feel lacking in anything. For happiness has never been in having more. It lies in our ability to stop and look deeply into what is already here. Once upon a time, on a teeming city street, morning rolled in like a tide of light. The pavement still held thin streaks of water from the street washing, reflecting neon signs and square patches of sky trapped between rooftops. Car horns layered over street vendors' calls. High heels clicked, and a streetcar's wheels shrieked along the underground rails. Everything wove into a frayed, hurrying spool of sound that left no one time to breathe. At the edge of that whirl, on the cold stone step of an old storefront, an elderly beggar sat huddled. A threadbare cloak wrapped his body thin as a wrinkled sheet of paper. One part of the hem was torn, another patched with mismatched cloth, like memories pieced together across winters. His hands were gaunt knuckles jutting like small stones in a shallow stream. Beside him sat a wooden bowl, its inside dark and polished by time. All morning, only a few coins lay rolling about. Each time the wind slipped through, they tapped together with a faint clink, thin as a metallic sigh. People rushed by as if racing their own shadows. Some glanced at him with pity. Others hurriedly looked away, as if he were a patch of street dust that would dirty their hands to touch. A girl of about 10 stared longer than the adults, but her mother tugged her along voice, low yet firm. "Don't look, we'll be late for school." The crowd swept the two of them away, leaving the child's baby hairs trembling in the sunlight. Near noon, the wind shifted, carrying rich aromas from a little eatery on the street. Kitchen smoke curled up like a brown silk ribbon slipping in and out beneath the low eaves. The smell of fresh rice-hot soup onions fried golden. all mingled and struck his empty stomach like tapping a skinless drum. The beggar stirred. He set his hands on his knees and slowly stood back, slightly bent. Each movement felt as if drifting through a thick band of mist. He followed the shade's edge, edging to the restaurant door. There the owner was shouting orders to the kitchen wrist, flipping a pan with a sharp sizzle snap like a quick hot piece of music. He stood a short distance from the counter, bowed his head deeply, and asked in a hoarse but courteous voice, "Sir, might you have a little leftover rice?" The owner spun around. His eyes were small and sharp. Grease streaked his apron. There was a heartbeat of hesitation. Then his face hardened. He flicked his arm as if shooing a stray cat about to mess up the kitchen. "Get out of here! Don't dirty up my shop!" The sound landed heavy like metal on tile. For an instant, the beggar stood still, his thin shadow drawn long across the floor, like a black thread pulled tight by the wind. He bowed even lower voice, so soft only someone nearby could hear. "I wish you a peaceful day." Then he turned away. No resentment, no more words. He walked back to his old steps, slow, but not dragging like crossing a narrow bridge strung between two breaths. He sat. The wooden bowl went by his side again. His face was as calm as a lake after wind, and strangely, the corner of his mouth held a very slight smile, thin as a strand of sunlight falling slowly on the sidewalk. A passerby had witnessed the whole scene. He was an office worker shirt, tucked-in tie, loosened one-notch leather briefcase, scuffed from too many brushes with the elevator. He stopped, as if someone had slipped a pebble into his shoe. At first, he meant only to glance and go, but the old man's gentle eyes and that thin smile held him there. "You were just driven off. You're hungry. You're cold. How can you still smile?" He blurted, surprised at himself for asking without thinking. The beggar looked up. His eyes were clear as early sun, unclouded by anger. He tilted his head, as though listening to the question once more inside himself, then replied, voice lighter than the draft in an alley, "Because I still have a smile. That means I'm already rich." The man stood silent. Far off, a horn blared again. A delivery truck slipped through the crowd. A news hawker called a fresh round. But in the midst of that swirl, the words that had just fallen were like a small stone touching the clear surface of a lake inside his chest. Ripples spread past 12-hour workdays, past the to-do list hanging in his phone, past the unseen comparisons he carried every morning. Rich. "Because you still have a smile," he echoed, unable to hide a mix of doubt and curiosity. "Yes." The old man nodded, the smile deepening a shade. "If I can still smile, there's room for warmth to stay in my heart. When the heart is warm, hunger cuts less sharply. I don't have much, but my smile is mine. No one can take it." The breeze shifted gently, carrying the far-off chime of a church clock striking noon. Pigeon shadows flashed over the curb, then shot up to a rooftop, leaving a few soft feathers trembling on a shop sign's edge. The passerby looked at the wooden bowl, the few coins still scattered, their dull shine frayed. He put a hand in his pocket, pulled out some bills, and hesitantly set them in. The money hit the wood with a clear clack. The old man bent slightly. "Thank you. May you have a peaceful day too." "But..." The man hesitated, wanting to ask more. "You were just pushed away, weren't you angry?" The old man shook his head, eyes resting on his own shadow, lying sideways on the step. Wind crosses a river's face. It ruffles for a moment, then goes smooth again, Anger is the wind. I keep the river in my heart. If it blows through, let it pass." The man smiled, a rare one for that morning. In his mind flashed the day's meeting, a biting remark from his boss that had set his chest on fire. All day the heat had smoldered under his dress shirt. Now this image of wind over water felt light, like a key opening some door. He studied the old man more closely. Deep crow's feet, a stubble of white beard, thin ears like dry leaves. Yet there was something he hadn't seen in himself in a long time, a quiet that needed no proof. "What's your name?" he asked. "People call me Sanita," the old man smiled. "And yours," the man told him. The old man nodded, as if tucking a bright pebble into an inner pocket. A group of school kids went by, jackets tied around their waists, sharing a fragrant bag of fries. One boy hesitated half a second, then stepped back and held out the open paper bag. "Please have some." The old man took it, broke off a small piece and chewed slowly, as if tasting a memory. The boy ran after his friends, a snaggle-toothed grin flickering once before vanishing around the corner. The old man offered the rest to the office worker. "Will you share with me?" The man laughed, feeling his throat warm, and took a fry. The lingering oil on his lips and the sweet potato scent stirred a hometown memory. A breezy afternoon, a charcoal brazier, his mother waiting at the porch. Against that backdrop, the city's clamor seemed to step back. "I have to get back to work," he remembered, suddenly gripping his briefcase handle. "But thank you for the smile, and thank you." The old man nodded, hand to his chest in greeting. "People usually give me coins. Today you gave me a conversation. That's a treasure too." The man walked 3 steps, then stopped. He took off his tie and loosened it another notch, smiling to himself. In the city noise, he heard a thinner layer of sound, the wind through flags, pigeons' wings. Coins, touching a wooden bowl, blending into a gentle music he hadn't noticed before. Afternoon tilted. The sun scraped across rooftops, scattering orange smears on shop windows. At the eatery, the owner was busy with customers, his back damp with sweat. Suddenly, he looked up and met the beggar's gaze from the steps. He started. There was no resentment there. Only that slim smile, like someone smiling at a cloud just dissolving. For no reason he could explain, he called to the kitchen hand, "Take that old man a bowl of rice, and make it with hot soup." The kitchen hand looked surprised, but ran off. The bowl arrived. The beggar received it, pressed his palms together in a deep thanks, then ate small spoonfuls, unhurried. Each one touched a warm string in his belly and set it humming. At the last spoonful, he set down his chopsticks and closed his eyes briefly. For that moment, the city blurred. Only 2 hands laid together, and an empty bowl shining with evening light remained. Night dropped streetlights flicking on in ribbons. The wind had turned colder, threading through thin coats. He pulled his cloak tighter, set the wooden bowl against the wall, and curled up. But the slight smile still rested on his lips. A young woman passed by, clutching a stack of files, and started. This wasn't the smile of someone who had everything. It was the smile of someone who still kept what can't be borrowed. She turned back and set a bill in the bowl. The money fell without a sound, but her smile, tentative and sincere, rang a very soft note inside her. Later, the streets thinned. A garbage truck rumbled by, dragging the smell of rust and dirty water. A night watchman stopped to light a cigarette, looked at the old man, and scratched his head. "It's pretty cold out, old fella." The old man said, voice warm like a small coal. But my heart is warm. The watchman grunted, not quite understanding, yet feeling less tired. He pushed the cart on its wheels, squeaking along the curb in a slow, even rhythm, like a heart settling down. By midnight, the city lay quiet as a great animal just asleep. Up high, a few windows still lit. On the step below, the beggar pulled his cloak over his head and leaned back against the wall. The wooden bowl was fuller than in the morning. Not much, but enough for a meal tomorrow. He closed his eyes, lips still holding that small curve. In a light doze, he dreamed of a grassy field and a great deal of sun. He walked past. Strangers smiled. He smiled back. The smiles touched and brightened the whole span of air. The next morning, the city woke as noisy as ever. The old beggar sat up, smoothed his hem, and placed the wooden bowl by his side as one would set down a friend. He looked across the street. The man from yesterday was passing, tie-worn lower eyes less tight. He saw the old man and waved. The old man nodded. His slim smile glinted in the early sun. And within the city's unending clamor, there was a small thing no one noticed from that day on. Whenever the wind blew the coins in the wooden bowl, didn't just clink like a sigh. They also sounded like a tiny bell reminding someone to smile. Because sometimes real wealth isn't in a pocket, but in still keeping a smile for ourselves and for each other. Has anyone ever heard an answer so simple, yet so piercing? A person with no home, no food, no possessions, and still he called himself rich simply because he kept a smile. In today's world, people often equate wealth with material things, only with lots of money, lots of stuff, lots of comforts. Do we feel entitled to happiness? Yet even empty-handed, that beggar held a treasure money cannot buy optimism. And the important thing is, his smile wasn't a forced mask to hide despair. It wasn't a way to pretend strength against hardship. That smile was a real light still left in his heart, a light suffering couldn't snuff out. There have been people living in lavish mansions wrapped in velvet and silk, owning everything others only dream of, and yet in their eyes, not a single glint remains. They smile at the world, but have never smiled honestly at themselves. Why is that? Because they fixate on what's lost, on what's not enough, and forget what still remains. The beggar, on the other hand, though he had nothing, saw the most precious thing. He still kept a smile and a heart not frozen by hatred. That is true wealth. Joy doesn't come from things, because things can be lost, but a grateful heart never runs dry. I still have a smile sounds simple, but it is a deeply mindful way of living. When you're grateful for what remains, the darkness of lack doesn't take over. You don't need to wait for life to be perfect to deserve happiness. You just stop counting what's missing and start counting what's still here. Still have breath to live. Still have legs to walk. Still have people who care. And still have the ability to smile. Optimism isn't naivete. It's the courage to choose light even while standing in the dark. That beggar could have despaired, raged, cursed. But he chose to smile, understanding that anger doesn't fill a stomach, but a smile lightens the heart. It was that smile that made him richer than many who are busy counting money but have forgotten how to smile at their own life. In modern life, almost everyone strains to have more money, more opportunities, more success, more titles to prove their worth. From school onward, we're taught to be first, to outdo, to keep climbing. as if a person's value is measured only by what they accumulate. Yet in the midst of that rush, perhaps what the soul most needs is far simpler, a smile not conditioned by anything. Not a smile for winning, not a smile for a prize, not a smile to convince others I'm fine, but a plain smile simply because we are alive, breath still in the chest, and we can look at this world with gentle eyes. That old beggar, after being driven off, after failing to get a bit of leftover rice, returned to his same step. As the sun sank, the last light fell like honey gilding his silver hair, making a strangely peaceful scene. No one knew if he got dinner. No one knew where he'd sleep, what would keep him warm. Only that. He still sat there quietly smiling. In a world where people often see success as visible peaks, his smile whispered a reminder. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't having more than someone else, but keeping your gentleness in a life that isn't gentle. Many gain everything and lose the ability to smile in peace, and some have nothing yet. Live each moment fully with a soft smile, needing no reason. Perhaps that is the rarest wealth today, wealth not from the wallet, but from a heart that hasn't been hardened by life. And simply being able to smile after a long day is already one of life's greatest victories. Once upon a time, morning at the Zen monastery, mist still lay like a thin silk veil over the mossy tile roofs. The work bell had just fallen silent, its resonance hanging in the air like an invisible circle. The brick courtyard was still wet with dew, the smell of damp earth mingling with a faint hint of incense drifting from the main hall. Sparrows hopped cautiously along the windowsill now, and then chirping to one another before darting away. On the east veranda, a young monk sat cross-legged at a simple wooden table. In front of him was a freshly poured cup of tea. When it was first brewed, steam rose in a soft haze, the tendrils twining, lifting, then dissolving like a sutra, just chanted, vanishing into emptiness before reaching the sky. But he had slipped into a scroll of scripture, waiting for annotation. The dry tip of his bamboo brush scraped back and forth, strokes dark and light trading places, as his mind ran after each winding character. Time quiet as a cat's paws walked past a ceramic cup without making a sound. When he finally looked up, he suddenly remembered the tea. He lifted it and took a sip. The fragrance was still there, but the warmth at the tip of his tongue was gone. He frowned. The tea's cold. It's lost its taste. The words pricked out like a tiny thorn. He set the cup down hard, and the sound of ceramic on wood made a dry clack. Inside him, something small cracked. Over a single cold cup of tea, he felt as if the whole morning had been stolen. Just then, his old teacher stepped across the veranda. The brown of the teacher's robe cast a soft shadow on the bricks. In his hand was the straw broom he'd used to sweep the courtyard. A few stalks still held dew, sparkling like tiny glass beads. He stopped and looked at the young monk with eyes gentle as water in a summer well, then smiled. Drinking tea is for settling the mind, not for defeating time. One light sentence set down as softly as a leaf on water, and the whole veranda seemed to fall silent for a beat. The birds sounded farther away. The wind sounded closer. The young monk stared, and the irritation in his chest scattered like a thin cloud suddenly pushed off the crown of his head by a breeze. The morning wind slipped through the brown robe, carrying a faint tea scent into the air. He looked at the cup before him, no longer steaming, but the liquid still clear, a pale green, like the edge of a cloud. The aroma was still there. It was only no longer hot. He bowed his head slightly, as if apologizing to a small friend he had wrongly blamed. "But, Master, when tea is cold, what's left to enjoy?" he asked in a small voice, as if afraid to crack something clear. The old teacher set the broom down on the veranda and sat beside him. Slanting morning light fell across his cheek, etching the deep wrinkles like the grain of old wood. He lifted the cup to his nose and took a very slow breath. When it's hot, tea speaks with warmth. When it's cool, tea speaks with fragrance and flavor, he said, turning to him. Both are tea's words, if you are willing to listen. The young monk was quiet. Above the veranda, a Bodhi leaf let go, turned once, then lay still on the bricks. The teacher handed him the cup. "Try listening." He lifted the cup. This time he didn't chase the heat that had gone. He let the tea's aroma, thin but deep, travel through his nose and dissolve into his chest. The first sip he held longer in his mouth, letting the light bitterness open, then slowly turn into a quiet sweetness at the back of his tongue. It turned out that when the tea was hot, he only grabbed at its warmth. Now that it was cool, he was meeting tea's other face, a reserved aftertaste, like a story told only to someone willing to sit close. "Are you drinking tea, or are you drinking your own irritation?" The teacher asked, a slim smile like a streak of sunlight. He flushed. Indeed, a moment ago he hadn't tasted tea at all. He had tasted his anger at not getting what I wanted. He had tried to tether a cup of tea to a fixed moment, hot, fragrant, just right, and when that moment passed, he blamed the whole morning. "You want everything to be on your schedule," the teacher said softly, as if reading his thought. "But life isn't a charcoal stove that glows red just because you will it to. Time is wind. We don't defeat the wind. We learn to walk with it." He bowed his head lower. A warm, light strand of shame moved through his chest. The teacher lifted the cup and turned it once. Cold tea is tea's lesson. It teaches you that everything has its season. When it arrives, we welcome it. When it goes, we give thanks. A cup of tea, a morning, a word of praise, a bolt of anger, a stretch of years. All the same, another novice ran past the veranda, a small bundle of firewood in his arms. Seeing the teacher, he stopped to press his palms and then continued. His footsteps were as light as raindrops. The young monk watched him go and wondered when he had forgotten how to pass lightly through a morning. Lately, he was always in a hurry, hurrying annotations, hurrying study, hurrying chores, hurrying to finish in time for the next thing. In each task, he stood at its end, staring at the next. A hot cup of tea quickly became a cold one, and a cold cup of tea, it turned out, was a mirror reflecting his own haste. Do you see? The teacher picked up the Bodhi leaf that had fallen and set it in the young monk's palm. When green, this leaf gave shade. When fallen, it returns itself to the earth. Both green and dry fulfill their part. Tea is the same. Hot and cool both complete its fragrance. Only our minds are not yet complete. Then, when tea is cold, what should I do, Master? He asked. Drink. The teacher smiled. Drink and know you are drinking. If you wanted hot, brew another cup, but don't throw this one away just because it isn't what you imagined. He held the words like a small lantern. He lifted the cup and took another sip with his eyes closed. Suddenly, he heard things he hadn't heard before. Birds shifting their pitch wind passing across the edge of his hair, the dew slowly withdrawing from the roof tiles. He even heard his own breath drawing in cool, as a stream flowing out warm as sunlight in the courtyard. "What did you just defeat the teacher?" asked Eyes smiling. "I don't know," he said hesitant. "Maybe the urge to win." The teacher chuckled softly. The sound was like a pebble rolling over water, making a few small circles and fading. "Drinking tea is for settling the mind, not defeating time," he repeated. "But this time, like a blessing. When you are settled, time softens. When you want to conquer it, time hardens in your hands like a stone. You'll be exhausted." He looked at the cup and thought of all the times he'd gotten angry for missing a meal, for a sudden rain, when clothes were out to dry, for a blossom falling just as it opened. All those small pieces of life, if he tried to beat them, he lost. But if he stood still and took a breath, they became little mirrors, reflecting a face he was getting used to the face of enough. From the front yard came a single tap on the handbell. The sun climbed a little higher and slipped into the veranda. The teacher stood, picked up the broom, and looked at him. "Brew another cup. But remember, when it's hot, drink it like a warm cloud. When it's cool, drink it like the cloud's shadow." He went to the kitchen. Water in the clay kettle began to sing, steaming like the breath of a small animal. He warmed the pot and cups dropped in the tea leaves and heard them meet the water with a tiny tick like the blink of an eye. The fragrance unfurled, green and fresh. He carried the tray back to the veranda, set one cup before the teacher and one before himself. They looked at each other without speaking. They lifted their cups at the same time. Blue lightly sipped, set them down. A cloud drifted past the veranda. A morning both full and empty, whole and changing. "Do you see now?" the teacher asked. "Yes," he smiled. "I see that sometimes. Tea doesn't lose its goodness when it cools. It just changes the way it's good." The teacher nodded. "And sometimes the morning isn't ruined at all. It's just that you haven't arrived in your own morning yet." He looked out at the courtyard. The last strip of dew receded from the step. On the bricks, the teacher's broom marks lay in neat parallel rows, like lines of scripture just arranged in the cabinet. At the end of the veranda, the Bodhi leaf from before lay beside the cooled cup like a very elegant period. He bowed his head very low. A silent yes moved through him, and the pulse at his wrist slowed half a beat. In that quiet, he understood from now on, each cup of tea, hot or cool, would no longer be a post to measure time, but a small bridge carrying him back to the morning at hand. And one day, stepping out onto the veranda and finding someone annoyed over something small, he would smile and repeat his teacher's words. Drinking tea is for settling the mind, not for defeating time. The sun was fully up. Noon bell was still far off. On the veranda, 2 thin cups of tea breathed fragrance, one warm one, just beginning to cool. The temple cat leapt onto the step, stretched out and dozed as if it too had learned the lesson. The wind passed by, brushing a cup's rim, making a tiny ring of ripples. The young monk set a hand to his heart and whispered to himself, "Here, this moment." Then he lifted the cup and drank. No rush, no regret. Tea went in time, went on, and stillness remained. Perhaps everyone has been like that young monk, thinking that for something to be worth it, It must happen exactly as we expect. And if it's off by just a little wrong timing off the plan, we flare with annoyance, regret, even anger, as if the whole world were wrong. But in truth, the world isn't wrong. Our minds are trying to control too much. A cold cup of tea doesn't erase the morning's calm. Only an impatient mind can break it. Yet we often confuse enjoying with controlling our joy. We think we're savoring, but underneath runs a list of conditions. The tea must be hot. The weather must be perfect. People must behave as we wish. Everything must sit in our palm. We try to force things into our mold, and when they refuse, we stew and blame and lose the ability to enjoy that very moment. Joy doesn't arise from control. It arises from acceptance. That's what the teacher understood. He didn't scold the young monk for letting the tea cool, nor insist he make a fresh pot. He simply reminded him, drinking tea is for settling the mind. A settled mind doesn't hinge on hot or cool, on whether things go right or not. The only thing that matters is whether in that moment the mind is truly present. A cool cup of tea drunk with a calm heart can still be a beautiful moment. A hot cup drunk with a hurried mind may be nothing more than steam passing without trace. In modern life, many chase happiness like a butterfly. They chart their years, months, days, yet at night they can't recall the last time they truly felt at peace. They think happiness lies ahead at the finish line in something grand that's coming. But happiness, like a butterfly, often lands only when we stand still long enough to see it. The Buddha taught that all phenomena are impermanent. Everything comes and goes by its own rhythm, not by anyone's wish. Trying to control impermanence is like trying to hold a stream in your hands. The tighter you grasp, the faster it slips away. But when you release control, the empty hand can receive the coolness of the water fully. So, with life. It won't always be hot on time, just so with our plans. Some things will arrive late, some dreams won't bloom, some cups of tea will cool. That doesn't make them less precious. The value of a moment isn't in whether it follows our script, but in whether we're willing to look at it with grateful eyes. Because once the heart pauses and is present, even a cool cup of tea can be a gift, and in that nothing else is needed. It's already enough. The old teacher kept walking the veranda, his wooden clogs tapping lightly on the gray stone like time's own breathing. Sunlight slipped through the leaves, laying warm golden bands across the mossy courtyard. The young monk watched him, and the tension in his eyes softened, like ripples fading on a pond. He lifted the cup again. This time, no haste, no frown. He took a small sip, slower, quieter. The tea was no longer hot, but still gentle, still penetrating. And in that moment, he heard birds singing on the roof tiles, smelled the morning sun woven into the tea's fragrance, and felt his heart grow light like a leaf just released from its branch. We can't always control what happens. Tea cools, rain falls, plans unravel, but we can always choose to be fully present with what is. When we loosen our grip on control, the mind stops resisting life. And when we stop resisting, we can finally see life was never against us. We were simply too busy forcing it to go our way. The more the mind tries to control, the more anxiety it breeds. Many modern studies in psychology show that the tighter people cling to expectations, the likelier they are to burn out emotionally. Reality moves, expectations stand still. As the gap between them widens, so does disappointment, Acceptance, on the other hand, helps the brain release more serotonin, a neurotransmitter fostering ease. It's no accident that people who practice mindfulness report higher happiness. They don't live to control, they live to feel. Add a little acceptance, and you'll see each moment has its own beauty, even if imperfect. Loosen a few expectations, and a smile can still appear. Though the tea has cooled, a day goes awry, the plan falls through. Because in the end, a cup of tea doesn't have to be hot to warm a soul. It only asks for a soul willing to sit still and truly savor. Then not only is the tea-drunk life itself, is lived fully, gently, and in peace. Once upon a time, at first light, when the night had just withdrawn from the treetops, the ancient temple seemed to wake with a long, barely audible breath. Mist, fine as a veil, lay over the mossy roof tiles and curled around the stone steps worn smooth by feet. From the monks' quarters, a wooden door eased open. A small novice, swallowed up by his brown robe, hitched up the hem and stepped onto the veranda. Mountain air slid through the cracks, chilly against his nape, so that he shivered once, but his little feet were already hurrying onto the first step that led up to the bell tower. The path to the tower was a green stone stairway that hugged the mountainside, its edges speckled with moss. On both sides, bamboo thickets clicked softly together like a wordless morning song. His eyes were bright like dew on a bodhi leaf, clear, eager, as if ready for a great festival to which no one is invited and everyone belongs. His footsteps were light, but his heart beat fast. He knew the bronze bell was waiting up there, and the moment the mallet touched it, releasing the day's first resonance into the sky, that was the happiest moment of all. The tower door opened with an old wooden latch letting out a creak, like a sleepy gatekeeper turning over. Inside, the cool, mingled scents of old wood, damp stone, and leftover night air. The great bell hung at the middle level, its body darkened by time carved with ancient motifs, a wave border around lotus blooms, seal script characters worn faint at the corners. Across the bell's surface, the handprints of generations of novices had polished a soft sheen like carved jade. The novice stood facing the bell, his back straight as a bamboo stalk. He bowed with palms together and exhaled softly so his heart could settle like a lake just after the wind. His small hands wrapped around the bell mallet, a wooden shaft with layers of cloth bound at the head, soft yet firm. He gathered himself, then gently swung it forward, not hurried, not hard, just in time with his heartbeat. Boom! The bell sounded deep and sonorous, full and warm, its tone stretching long like a stream of sound pouring into the early air. The waves of tone went out, struck the tower walls, rebounded and cradled the space like a pair of great arms. The mist outside quivered. Sparrows perched along the roof tiles suddenly burst into flight, scattering as tiny black dots through the blue-gray sky. Far off, the mountain ridge seemed to change color. The sun flushed red behind it, the first blade of light cutting the mist like a thin knife. He let the mallet fall, hands resting at his sides, and stood still. He didn't count the peals, didn't compare today's sound to yesterday's. He simply listened as the resonance thinned into the clouds. The mountains, the open sky thinned until only a hair-fine shimmer remained, and then that too was gone. In that instant, he smiled a small smile, but enough to light the face that still held a trace of the night. Every morning was like that. No one forced him. No one praised him. No achievements. No targets. Only a very pure joy born of that simple act itself. Some mornings the wind blew hard, the tower door rattled, and the bell's voice rode higher and farther. The novice pulled his robe close, ears reddening with cold, but his eyes still smiled. Some mornings the air was misting, and the fog so thick you could almost touch the scent of damp earth. He dried the mallet head struck more lightly, so the sound wouldn't weigh down the air, and was surprised how the tone turned clear, like a drop of water on stone. Then there were days of astonishing blue, when early sun slipped through the window to touch the bell, flashing a slim halo. He lifted the mallet along that ray and let it fall on a breath. The bell throbbed like the heart of a fledgling. Sometimes when he struck the first note, the doors of the monks' quarters swung open below. Elder monks headed toward the refectory. An old master crossing the courtyard would stop by habit and look up at the tower. A water-bearer might set down his yoke on hearing the bell press his palms together, as if letting the sound pass through him before moving on. To them, the bell didn't just mark the hour, it called the name of something that doesn't need words, only remembrance. Once after a night of mountain wind, he caught a cold. That morning his head felt heavy, and the stair seemed steeper. He climbed slower, stopping at each step to breathe. At the door, he leaned on the frame chest, rising and falling. He thought, maybe I should skip a day. But seeing the bell's body resting like a still lake, he suddenly felt sorry, as if he were late to meet a friend. He went in, took the mallet's small hands, but steady, and struck. The bell didn't ring loud that day. It was low, deep, and warm like a thin blanket around narrow shoulders. As the resonance slipped from the tower wall, the throbbing in his head receded half a pace. Another morning he arrived earlier than usual. The sky was still tinged purple stars not yet gone. He stood before the bell a long while without striking. He listened to the wind play at the window frame to a dewdrop, tapped the eave with a tiny techk to late insects change in shifts. Then he struck only once and stood letting the echo do the rest. That time he learned something. Sometimes joy doesn't come from doing more, but from doing one thing at the right moment with your whole heart. On the way down, he often met a goatherd pausing at the temple gate. The old man didn't go in. He just leaned on his staff to listen, the corner of his mouth trembling as if mouthing an old verse. One day, he told the boy, "This morning's bell made the mist fall faster." The novice laughed, unsure how literally that was true, but he understood the meaning. The sound had touched something beyond sight. Season followed season. The Bodhi leaves took turns green, gold, brown. Each day before the sun flared, the novice climbed the old stone steps. He grew. His arms lengthened, his shoulders filled out. The mallet felt lighter in his hands. But the joy stayed the same, fresh as the first day, pure as the first drop of dew. Someone once asked, "Why do you ring the bell?" He didn't search for a fancy answer. He said, "To wake the morning." Then after a beat, "To wake myself." On an early winter morning, the clouds pressed low, folds of cloud stacked like folded blankets across the ranges. He entered the tower and touched the bell. It was cold as well water. He stepped back, pressed his palms, Faces flickered in his mind, the elder monk kindling the stove, the old woman selling sticky rice at the gate, school children climbing the slope. He struck 1, 2, 3, each tone like a greeting. And when the last echo dissolved, he quietly greeted himself. Let's begin like this. On some days, the bell was late because a kitten had curled up asleep on the threshold. He sat and waited for it to wake, stroking its back, coaxing. Up you get, we've a happy thing to do. On other days, the bell came early because he dreamed of a talking cloud saying, ring it, ring it. Such small stories he later realized were seeds sown in his heart, seeds of unconditional cheer. People say every ritual begins with a heart wanting to touch the beautiful. For the novice, the morning bell was his own ritual, a ritual done by one attended by the entire sky. No audience, no applause, no timesheets, just a bell, a wooden mallet, 2 small hands, and a heart that thrilled at doing what felt exactly right. Every morning was like that. No one forced him, no one praised him, no achievements, no targets, only a very pure joy born of that simple act itself. And the deep boom. Each dawn over the years became a golden thread, stitching the sunrises together, keeping the old temple's lifeline serene, a lifeline that began with the smallest smile of a novice high in the tower, just as the last drop of dew slipped from a Bodhi leaf's edge. Happiness. Sometimes it isn't a grand reward waiting at the journey's end, but what is quietly sprouting in each small moment we so rarely pause to feel. For the novice, ringing the bell each morning carried none of the weight of a duty. No one gave quotas, no one hurried him. No one stood by to record credit. Still, he rose early, climbed cold stone steps through the mist, just to take the familiar mallet in hand and send a warm boom into the air. He didn't do it to fulfill a responsibility, but simply because it made his heart sing. A child's heart still holds its innocence, untaught by habit to turn the sacred into obligation. At that age, any action can become joy if done with full presence. No goals, no prizes, no witnesses needed. Only the feeling of life flowing through a moment. Adults are different. The grown-up world runs on results. From early on, we're taught to set goals to be useful to earn recognition. Useless things get pushed aside. Little by little, life is replaced by plans. People stop singing for fear of singing off-key. Stop drawing for fear it won't look good. Stop playing because there's no time forgetting that those very laughs, those stray lines, those unstructured minutes are where true joy lives. When we live too long inside musts and shoulds, we lose touch with the present. We do things no longer out of love, but for the outcome. We smile not because we're happy, but because we need to look okay. We walk without feeling our feet on the ground, heads down, chasing a hazy finish line. Some gather everything they dreamed of, big house, nice car, money, status, yet their eyes are still heavy with fatigue. Day by day, they live as if bound in a web of expectations. Not the novice. He didn't count the strikes, didn't log how many echoes today, didn't need to know who heard. He just stood there, drew the mallet back, tapped, and was quiet. He listened to the tone dissolve into the air like a drop of water soaking into soil, leaving no trace, yet leaving a coolness in the heart. This is the secret the Buddhist teaching calls mindfulness, doing each thing with your whole attention, not clinging to results, not letting the mind wander to past or future. When an act is done in presence, even the smallest task becomes a sacred rite. Washing a bowl, sweeping a courtyard, drinking a mouthful of water done with real attention can lighten the heart like a bell tone rising into the air and fading, leaving a clear quiet behind. You don't need to accomplish something great to be happy. Sometimes all you need is to learn to strike a bell just to hear it ring. Take a step just to feel your foot touch the ground. Breathe deep just to know you are alive. Then the ordinary moments become magical. And happiness is no longer a luxury. It's always been here waiting to be recognized whenever we pause and live it fully. When we fixate on destinations, we tend to lose the finest gift a journey gives, the very life unfolding in each step. The mind keeps pushing. Is it done yet? What did I get? Was it worth it? And while we're busy calculating, we can no longer hear the breath of the present. All achievements, however dazzling, fade with time. Fame will blur like letters in stone washed by rain. Money will change hands. Today's success becomes tomorrow's old story. But the moments we have truly lived, those never disappear. They linger quietly within us, like tea scent absorbed by clay, like a bell, whose sound has thinned into the air, but still hums softly in the listener's chest. The beauty of a journey lies in full presence, not in the final result. Like the novice who wakes early each day, climbs the cold steps, and rings a single bell. That bell doesn't change. The world doesn't end. Human suffering won't be recorded as an achievement. But it brightens a child's heart, lights a clear joy within him, and that in fact is what the world sorely needs. Souls who rejoice in being alive without needing a grand reason. Joy doesn't have to be large, seen, or proven by accomplishments. It only needs to be real, deep, and lived wholeheartedly in that moment. A small bell can mean more than 1,000 drums if it's struck with the whole heart. Tomorrow, that novice will still rise early, still run up the bell tower steps, still hug the familiar wooden mallet. Not for anyone to hear, not to be praised, but simply to remind himself, every new day deserves to begin with a tiny joy wholly felt. For when we live like that, we're not just passing through time, we are truly living within it. Once upon a time, at an ancient Zen monastery perched on a mountainside where clouds often wrapped the roof tiles like a shawl, there lived an old Zen master who was very quiet. He didn't give many talks or speak lofty doctrines. Each day he simply swept the courtyard, brewed a pot of tea, filled the rain jar, and mended his worn brown robe. Yet wherever he passed, the wind seemed lighter, the sound of falling leaves softer. Peace radiated from him like a still lake deep in the forest. No display, no effort, just presence. No one had ever seen him angry. No one had ever heard him complain. In summer's blazing heat, he wore a palm leaf hat and smiled. In winter's frost, when his breath turned to smoke, he wrapped his coat tighter, still the same smile. The young novices wondered among themselves, why is he always smiling? Though life is so simple, whether it's sunny or raining. Maybe he has nothing to be sad about, one guessed vaguely. Or maybe he understands something we don't, another whispered. One day, as winter was about to end, early morning, the north wind had lost its bite. The scent of damp earth drifted through the courtyard, and the sparrows gathered by the stone well chirping busily. The master called the boys to the west veranda, where the first light slipped through the Bodhi leaves and sprinkled gold onto the brick floor. He rolled up his brown sleeves, reached into the wide sleeve like a pouch, and pulled out a small cloth bundle tied with a hemp string. He loosened the knot. Click, click. Hundreds of dried beans spilled out, flashing in the morning sun like droplets of honey turned solid. The novice's eyes went wide. "Beans," one whispered. The master nodded, smiling with his eyes. Each day, whenever something makes me smile, I drop a bean in the pouch. Just one smile, just one small moment. And then, after a year, the pouch is full. He poured beans into his palm and invited each novice to touch them. Each bean was smooth small, still holding a trace of sunshine. One boy asked, his voice full of innocent doubt, "Master, do such small things deserve to be remembered?" The master bent down, picked up a bean and lifted it before his eyes, as if raising a rough gem. One morning I was sweeping when the wind rose and leaves fell heavily. I swept, and the courtyard stayed full. Suddenly, a kitten ran out from the kitchen, jumping after a leaf as if chasing a butterfly. I laughed, because I too once chased something like that. I dropped a bean in the pouch. He took another bean. One afternoon, rain poured down water, overflowed the gutter into the jar, falling tick-tick. I stood under the eaves and caught a drop in my hand. The water was cold and sweet, like touching a clear bell. I smiled and dropped a bean. He picked up another and held it to the light. Sometimes it's just a bowl of hot soup on a cold day, or the crackle of burning kindling, or a yellow leaf landing right on the page I was reading. I felt my heart touch something very small, yet very real. I smiled and dropped a bean. The boys looked at one another. The master's smile wasn't playful. It was like a small oil lamp, softly humming, steady, not dazzling, but warm enough for a long night. One asked, "Master, what if one day there's nothing to smile about? Then I look for it." The master answered, light as a breath, "And if I still can't find it? I ask, is it that my eyes have grown dim? Not that life lacks reasons to smile." He gathered the beans into a little pile on his robe and traced an invisible circle around them with his finger. At first, this pouch was nearly empty. I too had days I passed through without remembering how I'd lived, but once I decided to carry the bean pouch, I began to notice a bird's call, a nod from someone at the gate, a late-blooming flower, the thin scent of tea. Suddenly, everything came into focus, and then the pouch filled up. A mischievous boy picked up 2 beans, set them in his palm, and tried to weigh them. Master, beans are too light. A smile is too light. Can it stand up to a stormy day? The master smiled and folded the boy's hand closed as if tucking a leaf into a book. One bean won't fill your stomach, but one bean a day, and the heart will be full. Storms come and go. What remains is the habit of finding warmth in the cold rain. Then storms don't knock you down so easily. The first spring breeze drifted through. The hem of the master's robe moved like water stirred by a small fish. He slowly swept the beans back into the pouch, pulled the string tight, and handed it to the eldest novice. From today, each of you carry a small pouch. Whenever something makes you smile, something very small, drop in a bean. Open it at year's end. If the pouch is still thin, don't be sad. Just know you've skimmed past too much. If it's full, don't be proud. Just know life never lacked good things. You've only just learned how to see them. That afternoon, The boys went to the kitchen and asked the cook for a bowl of dried beans. Each sewed a little pouch from scrap cloth, tied with hemp string, and hid it in a sleeve. From then on, every so often the monastery courtyard would ring with a soft tick, the tiny sound of a bean falling into a pouch. Sometimes it was a tick for a hot bowl of porridge after communal work. Sometimes a tick because the grapefruit tree out back blossomed out of season. Sometimes a tick for a clumsy joke that made the whole kitchen burst out laughing. Sometimes a tick for breaking a bowl by accident, then hearing the master say, "It's broken, so we'll pick it up, that's all." Tick one bean for a relieved smile. Gradually, the whole monastery seemed to change tone. Without being told, people slowed one step to hear the rain, looked a moment longer to see a butterfly land on moss. The cook began to smile when the steam rose from the rice like a little cloud in a pen. The gatekeeper smiled when a young sparrow learning to fly bumped the pillar and stood stunned for a moment, as if reconsidering life. A young monk smiled when he realized he had let go of anger because his robe hadn't dried in time. He hung it again. Sun would come. Tick one bean. One day a novice wilted after a letter from home said the crops had failed. He sat very still beneath the Bodhi tree, hands motionless. At dusk, the master walked by, sat beside him, and said nothing. When it grew dark, he reached into his sleeve, took out a bean, and set it in the boy's hand. Today, I had 2 beans. One because I heard the first crickets of the season, one because I sat with you until evening. I'm sharing one with you. The boy looked at the bean in his palm, and for the first time smiled through his sadness. Tick a bean fell into the pouch. At year's end, on the winter's last day, mountain snow melted into thin rivulets down the stone steps. The master again called everyone to the west veranda. Each brought their pouch. Some were plump, some middling, some thin. No one was compared. No one was asked how many only. What do you remember most? The gatekeeper said, I remember a sleepy child greeting me, then waking up with a grin. The cook said, I remember a downpour when the porridge didn't boil over. The young monk said, I remember realizing I could let a harsh word pass. A little novice said, I remember the morning bell passing through my nose. The veranda laughed. The master listened and nodded as if hearing a long song made of single notes. At last, he opened his pouch. The beans poured into a round pile, not tall but wide. The slanting sun made them look like a streak of falling stars on the mat. He said, I don't laugh loud. I laugh many small times. Each one is a rung on a ladder. Climb and climb, and you find your heart standing higher, without noticing. A boy asked Master, if the day is too dark, will there still be a bean? The master laced his fingers and looked toward the mountain slope where clouds were flowing. Yes, on dark days it's hard to find one, but we can still put in a bean, the bean of knowing we are sad. To recognize your sadness is already a small light. He tied up his beans, handed each pouch back, and spoke softly, as if passing on a small flame carry them. Not to show off, but to remember happiness is a habit. No need for big things. Just notice what's good and present, one bean a day. In a year, the pouch is full. In 10 years, the heart is full. That night, the new moon lay like a sickle across the temple roof. The first spring breeze felt fresher than the old wind. The scent of grapefruit blossom threaded through the smell of firewood. Along the path, as wind passed brown sleeves every now and then, you could hear tick the tiny sound of a bean falling into a pouch. Not loud, not showy, but if you stood still long enough, you would realize those little sounds were lighting up a temple, a season, and a lifetime. Joy isn't a burst of fireworks that flares and dies, leaving a dark sky and a quiet smell of smoke. True joy is like small rays of sunlight slipping through leaves each morning, quiet, gentle, gathered day by day, until the light is enough to brighten an entire heart. The Master didn't wait for grand events to allow himself happiness. He didn't need a victory, a prize, or praise to smile. He trained himself to notice the small things appearing each day, to name them, to cherish them, so joy wouldn't blow past like a stray breeze. Most people live the opposite way. They wait for a special day to permit themselves to be happy, waiting for success, for money, for recognition, and think, then I'll be happy. Because they keep looking up at distant peaks, they no longer see the small flowers blooming quietly at the roadside. So busy hoarding big things, they lose the ability to gather small daily joys. Many live as if racing time. They wake to a list of tasks, eat in haste work, intention, and fall asleep exhausted. Day after day, they can't remember the last time they smiled for no reason. The irony is, they think happiness is a reward at the end of the road, but actually, happiness is the habit of the steps. Buddhist Teachings speaks of mindfulness, living fully in the present, not chasing the past, not worrying about the future. That master turned it into a very simple ritual. Whenever something in the day made him smile, however small, he dropped a bean into his pouch. One smile, one warm glance, a breeze scented with flowers, a bird call after the rain, all worthy of being noted. No need to keep a journal, no need to declare big goals, only to acknowledge in the heart there was just a joy. Modern psychology has shown this too. The brain tends to remember negative experiences more strongly than positive ones, the negativity bias. But when we deliberately record positives each day, that habit gradually retrains the brain to look for what's good. The more beans the master dropped, the easier he smiled, not because life suddenly became perfect, but because his mind had learned to look for reasons to be glad, instead of fixating on what was missing. Each day, he didn't ask, "What went wrong today?" but "What went well today?" That question sounds small, yet it's a great turning of the mind. When the heart orients toward the positive, the outer world gradually changes color too. Any day, however, ordinary, holds something good to remember so long as you pause to notice. In the end, happiness doesn't lie in having fewer problems, but in a heart warm enough to find a glimmer in any circumstance. And sometimes, all we need to do is drop a small bean into the pouch each time we smile. The soul is like a garden. The thoughts, feelings, and actions we tend daily are seeds quietly sprouting. What we sow will bloom. If day after day we water anxiety, anger, and rivalry, soon our inner plot will choke with weeds, negative thoughts tangling and blocking the light of peace. But if each day we patiently sow one little bean of joy, of gratitude, of kindness, then over time, the inner garden will fill with sunlight. At year's end, the old master's cloth pouch was full with beans. Each bean was a clear smile, an easy moment, a small kindness that happened. When he poured them out, it wasn't just lifeless beans rolling on the ground. It was a whole year lived in mindfulness and gratitude coming into focus. Those seemingly trivial moments had woven into a gentle picture of a peaceful life. Psychology has noted the mind's negativity bias, our tendency to remember the bad more than the good. So if we don't consciously cultivate the positive, the mind will naturally grow full of worry and discontent. But when we keep seeking the good each day, however small, the brain gradually reshapes itself to see life more positively. A greeting, a cool breeze, a friendly glance. Any of these can be a precious bean if we pause to register it. No one can hand you happiness if you don't practice recognizing it in your daily life. You don't need to wait for something big to arrive to allow yourself joy. Life doesn't need to be perfect for you to be at peace. You only need each day to quietly drop a bean into the pouch of the heart, a small action, a small joy, a gentle thought. For when you learn to gather little things like that one day, you'll look around and realize you're standing in a radiant garden of peace, made not by grand events, but by tiny rays of sunlight that were quietly sown into every day. Once upon a time, deep in an old, dense forest at the foot of the northern mountains, there stood an ancient temple that had existed for hundreds of years. Through countless seasons of sun and rain, through generations of abbots coming and going, the temple remained there, quiet and still, like a kindly elder watching over the entire forest. Green moss covered the curved roof tiles, and the stone slabs in the courtyard had been polished smooth, as if they had welcomed the footsteps of innumerable pilgrims. Mountain winds moved through the bamboo groves surrounding it, rustling softly like the whisper of time. Within the temple grounds, beside a row of ancient stone corridors, there was a small room resting quietly, like a sleeping leaf in the forest. It was so modest that if you weren't paying attention, you might take it for an old storage shed. No sign hung outside, no lanterns, no carved couplets. The old wooden door was darkened with age time, etched into the grain like wrinkles at the eyes of someone who has seen much. Inside, the simplicity could stop any first-time visitor in their tracks. No table, no chair, no cabinet, no bed. Only a woven mat frayed at the edges laid neatly on the clean, packed earth floor. A small window opened toward the stand of ancient bamboo swaying in the wind, and 4 bare white walls so plain and empty it felt as if the space itself were holding its breath. The person who lived there was an elderly monk who had been in that room for decades. Each day, he rose before the sun crested the ridge, sat in meditation through the misty dawn, then quietly swept the courtyard, watered the flowers, and poured tea. He hardly spoke, didn't preach, and didn't involve himself in anyone's affairs. Yet anyone who passed by and met his eyes felt a cool breeze glide through the heart. There was something about him, very light, very calm, very full, even though he owned nothing. One day, a visitor arrived from far away. He was a wealthy merchant from a bustling city, famous for his riches. He wore brocade clothes, polished leather shoes, and a glittering gold watch on his wrist. His attendants carried fine wooden chests draped in red silk, filled with expensive offerings. From the moment he stepped into the courtyard, his eyes kept darting about, and he seemed disappointed not to see gold and splendor, not to hear a great bronze bell ringing, not to witness a lively assembly of monks as he had imagined. When he heard from the abbot that deep within the temple grounds there lived an elderly monk Withdrawn and renowned for his tranquility, his curiosity grew. How could someone with no possessions, no status, no fame, no power command such respect? The question pricked at him like a burr, so when he was led to the small room by the stone corridor, he stepped inside and stopped short. Late afternoon light filtered through the small window, laying thin bands of gold across the smooth brown earth floor. In the quiet, he could hear the wind moving through the bamboo, the sparrows chattering in the distance, and the sound of his own heart oddly loud. There was not a single decoration in the room, no statue, no painting, not even an extra cup. Yet, instead of the chill, he expected, the emptiness radiated a warmth hard to describe, as if the very air in the room were smiling. The visitor turned to look at the monk. The small, elderly man in a dark brown robe was seated cross-legged on the old mat. His back was straight, like the bamboo outside his eyes, half closed, the corners of his mouth gently lifted. He showed no sign of waiting for or hosting an important guest. He was simply present. The visitor suddenly felt awkward, as if the luxury on his body had become out of place and noisy. He stood for a long moment, then spoke, his voice tinged with both amazement and pity. "Master, living in a room with nothing in it, don't you feel deprived?" The monk slowly opened his eyes. They were deep and clear, like the surface of a lake at dawn reflecting a sky of stillness. He smiled a smile as light as the thin sunlight falling through the bamboo. "No, because my heart is already full." The visitor was stunned. A vision of his city mansion flashed in his mind, glossy sets of rare wood furniture, expensive lacquer paintings, bookshelves packed to the brim, closets with no room left to stuff anything more. And yet amid all that, never once had he felt his heart as full as in this empty room. Outside, the evening wind passed through the bamboo. Leaves brushed each other like soft applause. In that moment, the visitor understood there are rooms crammed with things whose hearts are empty, and rooms with nothing in them that hold an entire sky of peace. It sounds like a plain statement. My heart is full, but behind that simplicity lies a lifetime of practice and transformation. In modern society, most of us are taught from childhood that happiness lives in what is tangible: big houses, ample wealth, comfortable living spaces, luxurious belongings. Step by step, we accumulate these things as if we're building a fortress, hoping that when we have enough, we'll be safe and serene. The paradox is this: the more we have, the more we worry. Every new item brings not only convenience, but also the burden of guarding it, maintaining it, fearing its loss. Many psychological studies have shown that life satisfaction does not rise in proportion to assets. Once income passes the level needed to cover basic needs, happiness hardly increases. Sometimes it even declines if it drags along the pressure to compete to hold status, or the fear of losing what we've got. So what we call possessions can become invisible chains binding the mind. The more we grip, the more we fear slipping. The higher we climb, the more anxious we feel when we look down. And thus, even amid luxury, we can't sleep soundly because we're straining to guard everything. By contrast, the monk in that empty room had nothing to lose, and precisely because of that, he had everything: lightness. A room without table or chair, without decorations, seemed empty, but was in fact filled with ease. Each morning, sunlight came through the window and spread a gold sheen across the smooth earthen floor. Each evening, wind sifted through the bamboo outside, carrying the clean, damp scent of the mountains. No locks, no shelves to arrange, no precious objects to protect. He lived like water, neither grasping nor being held. This is what Buddhist teaching calls knowing enough contentment. Knowing enough doesn't mean giving up everything. It means no longer relying on things to define your worth. A heart that knows enough can be as at ease in a thatched hut as in a mansion, because joy no longer comes from the outside, but from inner freedom. Many people think that to be at peace, they must own more. The truth is the opposite. The more you pile up, the heavier it gets. The simpler, the lighter. When there's nothing left to guard, the mind has space to settle. When you're no longer afraid of losing, each moment of life becomes precious. Each day that old monk opened his door to let the wind pass through the sunlight visit, and his heart roam free like a cloudless sky. His fullness didn't lie in what he had accumulated, but in the absence of feeling lacking. And perhaps that is the truest wealth that cannot be lost, because it doesn't sit in the hands, but in the heart. Have you ever tried sitting alone in a completely empty room? No phone to scroll, no music to fill the air, no work to keep you busy, just sitting quietly, doing nothing. What usually comes first isn't peace, but restlessness. The mind, so used to sound and motion, suddenly stripped of things to cling to, starts to thrash. Random thoughts, unfinished plans, lingering worries sweep in like a black cloud across the sky. The emptiness makes many people feel as if they're wasting time. But if you're patient enough to sit a little longer, something remarkable begins to happen. When the mind tires of searching for something to hold, a thin layer of stillness spreads like mist. Emptiness stops feeling like lack and becomes a kind of freedom, the freedom from dependence on stimulation, from the pressure to always be doing something to prove your worth. That is exactly what the old monk in the empty room understood. He didn't need furniture to feel he had a place. He didn't need costly objects to confirm his value. He didn't need to stockpile belongings to chase away the fear of being left behind. He needed only a heart that no longer demanded, having seen clearly that everything required for peaceful living has always been present within, not outside. While the modern world keeps teaching us to have more, faster, bigger, Buddhism whispers the opposite: have less, so that what remains is yourself. When needs lessen, burdens lighten. When craving quiets, the mind clears like a lake without ripples. And when you stop trying to hold everything, the inner door opens and peace walks in. The visitor left that empty room with a step far lighter than when he'd entered. He carried nothing in his hands, yet it felt as if he had been given an invisible gift. The lesson that the richest person is not the one who owns the most, but the one who needs the least. Because when you no longer need things to prove your worth or to patch over, a sense of lackfulness appears on its own. And that is the deepest freedom. It doesn't come from what you hold in your hands, but from a heart no longer bound by anything. Once upon a time, that kingdom was as prosperous as a silk carpet unfurled to the horizon. City walls gleamed in the sun, and the gilded palace roofs shimmered like waves on a river at noon. In the court ceremonial music, wooden bells and drums rose each morning. In the market, The scent of cinnamon and tangerine and the smell of honey cakes mingled with lively street calls. It seemed everything had reached the limit of abundance, and at the very center of that wealth stood the king, who could command 1,000 swords to leap from their sheaths with a single flick of his hand. He owned everything a person could dream of: treasuries piled high with jewels, granaries full as hills, war horses lined up on the parade ground, an elite army guarding day and night. Whatever he wanted, he only had to speak, and the vault doors would open, the carriage would roll, and servants would run like the wind to bring it in an instant. Yet among all that splendor, what he cherished most was not the crown or the ancestral sword, but a white porcelain bowl. The bowl was so thin that if you held it up near a window, the light shone through and gathered into a clear halo. In the morning sun, it sparkled like a dewdrop on a lotus petal, so fragile you feared even to look, and your hand trembled to touch it. The king believed it was the most precious object in the world. He had artisans make a special case of agar wood, lined with purple velvet, and had 5 silk sleeves sewn to wrap it, layer upon layer, as if wrapping a secret. Each day at a fixed hour, he opened the case himself, used the finest cloth to wipe every curve of the rim, then gazed at it for a long time, like a man entranced by a star that had just fallen into his hand. But the more he treasured it, the more uneasy he grew. The tighter he held on, the more he feared losing it. Thoughts of the bowl became like a little silkworm spinning thread day after day around his mind, until in council, the minister's petitions sounded like faraway water. At banquets amid music and laughter, he would suddenly fall silent, picturing the velvet case deep in the treasury. Had anyone broken in? Could a guard's careless flick of the wrist shatter everything? At night, a bed padded with velvet and a fur quilt soft as clouds could not soothe him to sleep. Sometimes he would start awake at the 3rd watch, heart pounding after dreaming of a cold, sharp crash. He would leap up, hurry down the long corridors, fit keys into locks one by one, breath steaming in the chill hands, shaking as he opened the case, only to see the bowl still there, radiant and intact. The momentary relief hadn't lasted a full breath when his eye caught a fine layer of dust clinging to the rim. He immediately ordered the chamberlain to bring water distilled from the first dew on bamboo tips, wiped it clean, dried it with fine silk, and carefully wrapped it again. And in the end, he locked it even more securely. The fear of loss grew like darkness poured into a room with too few lamps. He restricted access to the treasury, changed the guard schedule repeatedly, and checked every lock himself before bed. He didn't dare leave the capital for long and no longer wanted to attend crowded folk festivals. Every pleasure turned into a worry, processions to noisy night markets, too chaotic drums, too rousing, all might be ominous signs foretelling some loss. Joy slipped from his eyes without his noticing. In its place came a quiet tension, like a bowstring perpetually drawn to its limit, ready to snap at the slightest touch. The court still functioned. The harvests were still good. The people still at peace, but inside the king a strange hunger, gnawed hunger for reassurance that no treasure could buy. Then one morning, as he tried to lull himself back to sleep after a restless night, the king happened to overhear the guards whispering, "There's a monk in the mountains who lives simply, Anyone who meets him feels as light as a cloud. The words light as a cloud fell into his heart like the sound of cool water in a desert. He decided to go, not from curiosity, but from exhaustion. He ordered a golden palanquin attendance and the royal guard. But after a moment, he changed his mind. He didn't want anyone to know. He didn't want people to see a powerful king seeking out a forest monk for something even the throne could not grant. So at first light, he put on a commoner's robe, hid his silver hair beneath a rough hat, cradled the velvet case in both hands, and slipped out of the palace. The mountain path was empty beads of dew still strung along the grass. His footsteps blended with the wind in the bamboo, forming a steady rhythm he had never known in his busy life. The embroidery on his shoes soon turned dusty. For the first time in years, he walked without drums or trumpets, without banners or canopies, with no one bowing to clear the way, only silence for company. At first, the silence made him uneasy. Then, surprisingly, it felt pleasant. The monastery clung to the mountainside roof tiles, dark with moss stone steps worn by passing feet. Thin kitchen smoke drifted about, the smell of fresh rice mingling with damp wood. In the courtyard, an old man in a brown robe was sweeping leaves. His back was slightly bent, his movements unhurried, but his eyes were bright as a star just gone out. The king approached, bowed gently, opened the velvet case, lifted the bowl with both hands, and spoke in a hoarse voice from a sleepless night. "Master, this is my most precious possession." The monk set down his broom and received the bowl. His hands were thin but steady veins, like old roots. He held the bowl near the veranda, turning it slightly. Light passed through the thin porcelain and cast a faint ring around the rim. He smiled a smile that flitted by like a bird, yet warm enough to make the onlooker breathe easier. And then, before the question could even form, the monk let go. The bowl fell. Everything happened strangely slowly. First, the sound of air being cut, then a cold slice of silence, then crash, a sharp shattering that pierced the morning. Shards flew, flashed on the stone floor, then lay still like fragments of a fallen moon. The king froze. His throat went dry. His eyes opened so wide his lids ached. Only one thought rang out. It's broken, broken. The thing he had guarded for years, locked behind 5 layers. The thing he thought was the soul of the peace he longed for. The monk stood there as ordinary as if he had merely laid a dry leaf on the ground. He looked into the king's eyes and spoke, his voice as light as wind passing through bamboo. If an object can make you tremble every day for fear of losing it, it is not a treasure. What's truly precious is a heart that fears losing nothing at all. Those words didn't sound heavy, but when they fell into the king's heart, they weighed like a stone, silencing all the noise that had filled his head for so long. In all these years, he had never thought of it that way. He had imagined doors, locks, and guards would protect his peace. He hadn't realized that the fear of loss itself was the chain tightening around his ankle. He thought holding on to the thing meant holding on to his heart. He hadn't known that the tighter he held, the more his heart slipped away. He bent down and looked at the scattered shards, each reflecting a scrap of blue sky. Strangely, no furious rage flared up in him, as it usually did when someone made a mistake. No instinctive shout from the throne rose to his lips. Only a quiet opened wide enough for him to hear his heartbeat and for it to slow. He looked up at the monk's calm face, and suddenly, something that had weighed on his chest fell away. He laughed, not the laugh of a victor, and not a bitter laugh either. It was a light laugh, as if someone had opened a window deep in his chest and wind had rushed in, billowing the curtains. He bowed deeply. No word of blame. Then he turned and left the monastery empty-handed, his steps light as morning mist. The path down seemed shorter than the climb. The sky looked bluer, the bamboo greener, the brook brighter. He passed a small hamlet where children were playing by the water, tossing pebbles and watching rings spread. He stopped for a moment and watched them, feeling his heart quiver like a finger touching a thin thread. He walked on, listening to birds flit through branches, breathing in the scent of sunlight on thatched roofs. Back in the capital, the palace gates still opened on time, and the guards saluted by the book. But in the king's eyes, something had changed. The sky over the grand hall no longer felt like a heavy dome pressing down. The treasury, where he had come and gone like an addict, suddenly seemed like an ordinary storeroom. He walked past without stopping, not because he despised what was inside, but because he understood it no longer had the power to set his heartbeat. At court, he looked ministers in the face and listened to each word as if it were a drop fallen into a still basin. At banquets, he ate slowly, tasting the sweet and salty, instead of chewing absent-mindedly. At night, he sometimes sat on the veranda, looked at the crescent moon slung across the palace roofs, and realized it had been a very long time since he had looked at the moon. Sleep came lightly, like a small fish gliding across a lake. The next morning, instead of checking 5 locks, he strolled in the garden. He stopped at a pomegranate tree in bloom. When he touched a thick red petal, his fingertip held a fragrance like brushing an old story. In a corner, an elderly gardener was watering. The king asked about the weather, the soil, the varieties, questions he had never made time for. The gardener answered slowly, and the king listened with a patience he hadn't known he possessed. News spread that the king has changed, not because he issued new decrees, but because officials saw him smile more easily, speak more slowly, and hold his gaze longer. People heard he rarely attended late-night feasts and sometimes appeared at seasonal fairs, standing at a stall to ask about the price of rice or salt. No one knew about the shattered porcelain bowl. No one needed to. What truly changed lay in a wordless place where an old fear had been set down. After leaving the monastery, the king would sometimes remember the crash of that day. Strangely, each time he did, his heart felt a little brighter, as if the breaking had awakened an empty space for the wind to pass through. He understood that freedom doesn't lie in gripping tightly, but in the moment you dare to release the fear of losing. Once the fear left, everything remaining, the sky, the brook, children's laughter, the taste of hot rice appeared clearer than ever. The kingdom remained as prosperous as before, but for the king, every day since had been a new day, not because he had gained any new treasure, but because he had shed a shackle. And sometimes passing the treasury, he would pause not to check the locks, but to smile at his former self, the man who once thought peace lay in a bowl, and who now knew peace lies only in a heart that can let go. From that story comes a simple truth we often forget. While everyone rushes to seek happiness outside, the root of true happiness lies within. In modern life, people often believe they must have more to be at ease, more money to stop worrying, more fame to be respected, more assets to feel safe, more opportunities to avoid being left behind. Yet the more we cling to, the heavier the heart grows, because having many things to hold also means many things to fear losing. That fear seeps into the smallest moments. Fear of losing a job brings sleepless nights. Fear of crisis makes every headline spike your pulse. Fear of failure turns each step into tension and doubt. Life gradually becomes continuous guarding rather than enjoyment. Happiness, therefore, doesn't come from material things. Material is fragile here today, gone tomorrow. Psychology shows the satisfaction from a new purchase often lasts only a few days before returning to baseline. That's the hedonic adaptation loop. The more we have, the faster the brain treats it as normal and demands more. So people aren't anxious because they have too little, but because they never learned to stop and feel enough. Knowing enough is true wealth. When we demand less, we can truly enjoy what is already here. A warm cup of tea, a simple meal, an afternoon watching clouds. Any can be a treasure if we no longer insist they be more or better. Knowing enough doesn't mean abandoning dreams. It means not suspending our happiness in some distant future. Don't wait for something new to be happy. Find joy in what is present. Above all, learn to release fear. Fear is an invisible shackle that locks the heart. It keeps us tense, defensive, always on guard instead of at ease. Letting go doesn't mean throwing everything away. It means no longer letting the heart be bound by what we can't control. This is also the Buddha's teaching on impermanence. Everything comes and goes, and because nothing lasts forever, grasping won't make it stay. When we no longer cling, the heart grows light. When the heart is light, insight is clear. When insight is clear, the heart is calm. Only then are we truly free. Freedom isn't holding everything. It's not needing to hold anything in order to feel full. That is true happiness, not in what we grip in our hands, but in daring to loosen our grip, so the heart can rest and peace has a place to return. Happiness is not in material things. Houses, cars, status, these are outward forms that may create a temporary sense of safety, but they cannot secure a truly peaceful mind if fear still fills the depths. Material wealth follows impermanence. It can be lost, replaced, or taken at any time. The more we rely on it, the more easily we panic when life changes. Many believe that a bigger house, a prestigious job, or a fat bank account will end their worries, only to discover new fears. Fear of loss, of falling behind, of being surpassed. The more the goods, the more the worries, because nothing is guaranteed. Knowing enough is being rich. True wealth isn't measured by quantity of possessions, but by the ability to feel the value of small, everyday things. When we ask for less, the mind has space to enjoy what is. A simple meal, a quiet afternoon, a moment of ease, these can be happiness if the mind isn't urging more or better. Research shows satisfaction rises not with accumulation, but with gratitude and appreciation. When we know enough, we compare less, race less, and start truly living instead of merely stockpiling. Release fear to live lightly. Fear is an invisible burden that keeps the mind tense and defensive. The more we cling to the uncertain, the more the mind is bound and loses freedom. Letting go here doesn't mean abandoning all things. It means not letting the mind be controlled by what lies beyond our control. When we stop clinging, the mind grows lighter. When lighter, thought grows clearer. When clearer, the heart is at peace. This reflects the Buddhist spirit of impermanence. Nothing lasts, so learn to loosen when things change. Only when we no longer fear losing are we truly free. And only in that freedom can peace take root, not dependent on circumstances, not conditional, simply living fully with what is. That is the most enduring wealth. We've just walked a long path together through old Zen tales, light as falling leaves, yet holding roots deep as ancient trees. These stories aren't loud or showy, but each word and image quietly touches the deepest part of the heart, where you once knew how to smile at a breeze, to feel calm just by sitting still, and believed that happiness isn't at the finish line, but in each step you take. The Buddha taught a still mind is the foundation of wisdom. Knowing enough is the greatest treasure. Living mindfully in each moment is the shortest path to peace. These stories aren't for you to memorize, but for you to return to yourself, to simplicity, humility, and the gratitude sleeping within. In modern life, we often run too fast and want too much, forgetting that when the heart is full, even an empty room feels bright as dawn. When the heart knows how to pause, every small thing becomes precious. A cool cup of tea, a smile, a morning bell, a fallen leaf. For peace doesn't come from the outside. It comes from the gentle way you look at the present. If these stories helped your heart grow quiet for a moment, please subscribe to the Buddhism Seeds channel to continue the journey back to yourself. Press like, share the video to spread seeds of peace to more hearts, and leave a comment below about the small thing today that made you smile. Who knows? Your simple sharing may be the little lamp that guides someone through a dark night of life.